bring the planning commission for February 28th to order, and we'll start with the roll call.
Thank you. Chair Lane.
Here.
Commissioner Tonelli.
Here.
Commissioner Sokolov.
Here.
Commissioner Lamb.
Here.
Commissioner Lerner.
Here.
Okay, great. And the next item on the agenda is public comments. And what we do with the public comments is we open it up for things that are not on the agenda. So if there's anything that people want to bring forward, sometimes that leads to discussions on later meeting, or bring something to the attention of the commission that we didn't know about. So I'll go ahead and open up the public comment section at this point for something that's not on the agenda. Go ahead. Come on.
Yes, my name's Tina Patterson.
Yeah, come on up.
I'd like to read my notes because I know there's a 3-minute limit, right?
Go ahead.
Okay. My name's Tina Patterson. I live at 176 Tuscaloosa Avenue. I'm next door to a large residential construction project at 172. And I'm just very, very concerned. Obviously, the symbol of our town is the majestic oak, and yet many of our town's heritage trees have been dying over the past 7 years. I attribute this decline to a combination of the drought and, most importantly, to the negative impact from the dramatic increase in building projects, especially those projects where builders ignore our town's tree preservation guidelines that have been in existence since 2004. The builders are required to acknowledge these tree preservation guidelines in writing before obtaining any permits. Yet some choose to ignore the regulations, knowing that the overwhelmed town staff can't possibly monitor all the projects for on-site conformance. The tree preservation guidelines specifically prohibit the following activities within a heritage trees protected zone. I recorded all of them being ignored at 172 Tuscaloosa and notified both the on-site manager as well as the town arborist. Failure to erect protective fencing around all specifically numbered heritage trees as noted on the approved plan. Removal of said protective fencing for the builder's convenience without specific approval from the town arborist. Disturbance and compaction of soil by the recurring use of a backhoe and skip loader within the TPZ areas. Trenching within a TPZ with a backhoe instead of the required digging by hand to minimize root cutting. Storage of excavated soil literally up against the trunk of a heritage oak. The tree preservation guidelines prohibit new construction in TPZ zones. Yet the builder at 172 managed to negotiate 2 exclusions which allow him to build within the TPZ of up to 8 heritage trees, even though there were nearby alternative sites. Builders know that the town does not consistently enforce the guidelines, so they negotiate with the overwhelmed town arborist and other individuals for exceptions to the regulations, and consequently the guidelines become meaningless. It appears that builders see the tree preservation guidelines as an irritating annoyance to be dealt with and not conform to. The first negotiated exception to build within a TPZ at 172 Tuscaloosa, and there are 2 of these exceptions, this is the first, is for a 6-foot-high walled utility structure, 33 feet by 13 feet, which is currently under construction along the front property line. This structure is well within the TPZ of 8 heritage oaks, as measured by the existing as well as the proposed 10 times trunk diameter calculation for new structures, or even by the 8 times trunk diameter for walls. The second negotiated exception to build within a TPZ at 172 Tuscaloosa is a planned but not yet built detached garage with an additional attached 6-foot walled utility pad. This garage is well within the TPZ of 2 heritage trees based on both the existing 12 times diameter of trunk measurement as well as a proposed 10 times diameter of trunk measurement. This approved garage could be located approximately 15 feet closer to the main house, thus removing it from the TPZ while still maintaining the required 8-foot separation from the main building. Bottom line, I can't understand how these 2 structures were approved to be built in heritage TPZ zones, and I'd really like your advice as how I could object to their location. Obviously, one is currently under construction, but one has yet to be built. And so I'd like to know, is there any protocol or any advice for me as,
Yes, go ahead. I'll let our attorneys start and then staff.
I can just explain the process. So this is comments for agenda and
Yes.
items not on the agenda. So we cannot comment or take it or have a discussion at this point. However, the town is, they have complaint-based enforcement, and I am hearing a complaint, and so I suggest that we take this offline and work directly with staff.
good, thank you,
Absolutely.
thank you.
And we'll be talking about this, as you see on the agenda later on too.
Yes.
On our item later on. Thank you for bringing that up. And I'll be interested in staff input on that too. All right, anyone else on the public hearing items? All right, then I'll go ahead and close the public hearing item and bring it back to the board for that was public comment section. Now we go to public hearing. Actually, we're ready to minutes first, right? Let's do the minutes first. Yeah, I was looking through the minutes and Mr. Lane was talking a lot on the last minutes for some reason. I don't know what the deal was there. But I need any updates to minutes or motion for stuff. Make a motion to take any comments. Motion. Motion seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Go ahead and take that. We'll go to the public hearing section. And just for those of you who haven't been part of this process before, the way we handle this is we go ahead and get an overview for everyone from staff. And then we go ahead and open up the public comment section. We'll let the applicant speak first. And then we'll have anyone else who wants to speak on that item. Then we'll bring it back to the commission we'll close the public hearing and bring it back for the commission for discussion and action as appropriate. And we'll do that on every item. And I'll try to make sure anybody who comes in late, I'll reiterate that so they're all familiar with the process. All right, with that, then we'll go with structure permit item A, structures, special structures permit 74 Berry Lane. And we'll start with the staff report.
Thank you. So the request before you tonight at 74 Berry Lane is a special structures permit to allow the construction of a swimming pool and its associated equipment to encroach within the front yard setback. The property at 74 Berry Lane is an existing legal non-conforming swimming pool that's located in the same general proximity as where the proposed pool is to be situated. The existing pool right now and has a trellis off to the side of it. It's perpendicular to what is its side property line. All of that is to be removed. It's about 2 feet from the property line, that shared property line. The proposal is to change the angle of that swimming pool so that it's parallel to that said same property line, located at a new distance, approximately 20 to 34 feet from what was a 2-foot side yard setback. The rearranging or re-angling of that pool in the same, again, general proximity, excuse me, has the new pool encroaching within the required front yard setback for accessory structures, or a portion of it, I should say. Specifically, it, let's see here. 6.5 feet into that required 30-foot setback behind the front line of the main house. So it's proposed at a distance of 23.5 feet behind the front of the main house. Excuse me. So that's about 58 square feet of the total swimming pool itself. Given the location of the lot off of the end of a cul-de-sac, the front property line is the side property line of its adjacent neighbor. You can see from some of the photographs that were submitted as part of the project application, there's an existing putting green that's in the technical front yard area. To the side of that putting green is where the existing pool equipment is. Existing pool equipment's on a concrete pad and enclosed by 6-foot fencing. What the applicants want to do as part of their new swimming pool is to replace the existing equipment with newer, much quieter modeling of pool equipment, as well as replace the dilapidated fencing at a 6-foot height maximum on the existing concrete pad. The neighbor to that side at 86, let me see, make sure, 86 Berry Lane, has submitted a letter stating their support to allow for the replacement of the equipment in that same location within the front yard. Town arborist has reviewed the plans. The location of the swimming pool with that slight encroachment in the front, they could indeed shift it back so that the request wouldn't be before you tonight for a special structures permit. The resulting impact of that, however, could be within the tree protection zone of some existing oak as well as Japanese maple trees. So that was another premise for the applicant's request to have that slight encroachment within the setback. So with all of that and with the conditions that are included in the draft special structures permit, staff is able to make the required findings and is recommending approval of the application. So happy to answer any questions. The landscape architect is here as well, and I'm not sure about the property owners, but
Okay. Any questions,
that's
Seth?
it.
Just one,
Yep.
and I'm not sure if I'm confusing this with another item, but the proposed location of the pool equipment,
Yep.
is that directly across from existing pool equipment at 8 Faxon as well?
8 Faxon, or there's 86, which is,
Faxon is pretty far over.
There's another pool backing up at 8 Faxon, and I thought I read somewhere that there was already existing pool equipment for that pool in that yard. Maybe I'm mistaken. Yeah.
yes, kitty corner to, yes.
Okay. I just thought, or maybe it might be 62, I might have the addresses mixed up. I thought I read something that there's already existing pool
62,
equipment nearby.
there's an existing swimming pool
Right.
nearby the proposed swimming pool. They actually line up almost evenly,
Yeah,
parallel.
They're pretty close together.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was just curious.
The existing one, is it?
8
Yeah.
Faxon.
You dug a ditch between the two, you'd have a long pool. Yeah. It's not too far away.
Okay,
All right.
that's all.
Any other
And so
questions?
I actually, so neighbor outreach, we have one letter of support, any?
We have one letter of support. I have one woman phoned me today and wanted to look at the plans, and I have no further comment that I received, at least upon her review of the plan.
Anything else? All right, good. Then I'll go ahead and open up the public hearing section, and we'll start with the applicant, or the applicant start with it.
Hi, I'm Randy Tuma, the landscape architect on the project. And the primary reason driving the new location of the pool, in addition to the old pool being out of date and having been rebuilt twice, was to preserve trees. Which we believe in as landscape
You're not running
architects.
for office or anything, right?
So- What's that?
Go ahead. Okay.
So I'll be happy to answer any questions you have about why we oriented it the way it is, but I think it all makes sense to me. But I've been kind of deeply into this for a number of months now. Is there
I have a
anything
couple
I can?
questions. I went out to
Yes.
the site and
Yes.
I looked, I didn't walk on the site, I just looked through the fence and took some pictures.
Uh-huh.
So we got complaints about somebody driving around the neighborhood with taking pictures out of the neighborhood.
Uh-oh.
There were 2 orange flags stuck on the ground near the putting surface. Is that where the edge of the pool was going to be? There were 2 like stakes.
You know, the pool isn't near the putting green. I don't think you'd be able to see that from the gate, so I
That's what I was
can't.
wondering.
Oh, you know, the contractor has been out there kind of determining where existing utilities are, and so he may have been.
Okay. It was just off the
Mistaken.
putting green. That's why it was closer to the putting green than it looked like in the drawing. That's why I was asking.
Yeah, I can't answer the question.
Okay.
Sorry.
Maybe that's where is there going to be a concrete surround around the pool or something like that?
No, we're planning it to be wood. The fence around the pool?
Okay.
Around the pool or
Around the pool.
The pool? No.
Okay.
Oh, I mean a coping, yes.
Okay.
Did you mean
Yeah, that's
when
right.
you mean a surround?
I don't know, beyond the coping, I was wondering. It just seemed like that those flags were closer to the putting green than it looked like on the drawing.
They must have been, because you wouldn't be able, from the gate, you wouldn't be able to even see where the pool is. The house would block the
Yeah,
total
maybe
view of that
was,
area.
Maybe that was marking a water pipe or something.
Yeah,
like
the
rural
contractor
line.
has definitely been
Okay.
marking
All right.
utilities.
Good, that makes more sense to me.
Sure.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Anything there? All right, any other comments?
Not unless you have something more that I can help you with.
That's it. Pretty straightforward. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, is there anyone else speaking on this item? All right, then I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion, action, and appropriate.
If I'm happy to make a motion unless anyone has.
Yeah, I didn't see anything, this one that seems, actually, because of the situation, that seemed like an improvement over what is better than that.
The summary covers that quite nicely.
Yeah, that's what it is.
I'll move.
All right,
Move that the planning commission approve the special structure permit at 74 Berry Lane based on the findings and for the reasons enumerated in the staff report, subject to the conditions listed on the special structure permit certificate to allow swimming pool and associated pool equipment to be located within the front yard setback.
moved and seconded, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? All right, passes unanimously. Thank you very much, thanks for coming. All right, item B is the special structure permit at 6 Carroll Lane. Now, we'll go ahead and, for those of you just getting in, the procedure that we're following is that we will go ahead and turn it over to the staff for an overview for everyone to hear, and then we open our public hearing. We start with the applicant or the representative, and then anyone else who wants to speak on the item, and then we bring it back to the commission for discussion, and that action is appropriate. All right, so we'll continue on that format on this one too. Go ahead, thank you.
So the request before you tonight at 6 Caroline is also for a special structures permit, also to allow a swimming pool to encroach, this time within a side yard setback as opposed to a front yard setback from the item that we just heard. So just a little background on this property at 6 Cal Lane and an overview of its existing conditions. So the property is a flag lot in shape. You can see, however, towards its rear, it follows the presence of an existing 30-foot wide drainage easement, or the Atherton Channel. That 30-foot drainage easement goes exactly at the boundary line of the rear property line for this property, and then in towards the interior of the lot. The site's accessed off of Cowell Lane and abuts Camino Al Lago to the rear. Back in 1976, at the time that the home was originally constructed, the property line designations for the site were made that if you are standing on Cow Lane looking interior to the site, the property line to your right would be your front, and then it would follow suit. So that property line that I mentioned that follows the Atherton Drainage Channel is the rear, with your side setback being in the quote back of the house that backs up to Camino Al Lago.
I looked at it, I went, huh? Okay.
Subsequent to the original construction of the house in 1976, I found a variance application that was granted for the property in 1999 that allowed for the construction of a detached garage within the front yard area. So that is attempting to give an overview of the existing conditions of the house itself. There's a main house, there's the detached garage that I just mentioned. There's also an existing swimming pool that currently encroaches in the required side yard area as well. So what the proposal before you tonight is requesting is the demolition of the existing swimming pool and the construction of a new swimming pool that also is proposing to encroach in what is the defined side yard or closest to Camino Al Lago. The specific dimensions that the pool is requesting to encroach, because that's an exterior side property line, accessory structures and buildings, whether it's a swimming pool or a guest house, would be required to meet the same setback as the main building. In this case, would be 50 feet. I think it's interesting to note that if to date property lines were to be determined, and that property line, the back along Camino Al Lago, was the designated rear property line, that swimming pool would be allowed to go 10 feet to that property line boundary if it was a rear. But because it was designated a side back in 76, thank you, we need to follow that prior town determination. So the pool itself, again, is in the same general proximity as the existing swimming pool. It actually follows it completely parallel. It's just shorter and shifted to the right of the existing swimming pool, closer to Camino al Lago. Again, the pool distance itself to Camino al Lago is proposed at 20 feet. The pool actually exceeds both the front and rear yard setbacks that would be required, which is 120 feet from the front property line or 30 feet behind the front line of the main building. Excuse me. Given the presence of the existing drainage channel that runs the entire rear of the property, accessory buildings or structures such as swimming pools are allowed to go 10 feet to a required rear yard. That drainage easement makes that not possible for the entire rear yard of this property, which does constrain the ability for other accessory buildings or structures to be constructed. Part of the applicant's submitted premise for the request of a special structures permit before you tonight is their plan to do other future improvements, construct other new accessory buildings. You can see on their proposed site plan with the swimming pool proposal to encroach in that required side yard, it gives them the ability to locate buildings and taller structures within the standard setback requirements for accessory buildings and structures. So with all of those components, as well as the town arborist's review of any potential impact to heritage trees, standard mitigation has been included in the draft approval certificate, and the staff is recommending approval of the application. I see the project architect here, who would also be available to answer any questions if you have them.
Any questions of staff? This is a pretty weirdly shaped lot. I mean, it looks like on the top, it looks like a B-1 bomber from the top. So the question I have for you is that we've had applications similar to this before, and the applicant has also requested a swap in orientation of the zoning. Why isn't that done on this one?
Lot line designation?
Yeah.
If they were to move forward with the request to redesignate lot lines and change them from rear to side, it would run into a domino effect and make other existing structures and buildings non-compliant, which would preclude their ability to do such.
It's a really weird lot. Okay, all right, any other questions? All right, then I'll go ahead and open the public hearing, and we'll start with the applicant or their representative.
Right. Hi, I'm Phoebe Lamb from William Duff Architects. I just wanted to say that to the commission, thanks for considering this item. The homeowner and us are committed to making sure that we locate building mass as towards the interior of the lot as possible to decrease the view from, Camino al Lago and from, actually it's really only Camino al Lago, from the other neighbors. We are also committed to screening along all of Camino al Lago, which currently has some screening, but it's a little sparse, it could be spruced up a bit more. So we really like to provide both privacy for the homeowner and also for anyone driving along Camino al Lago. And lastly, there are 2 larger oaks that are heritage trees along the property line, and we are also committed to making sure we have as minimal of an impact to those trees as possible. And just to note, I think there's somebody who actually went out on site today. The current site walls, because there's a brick wall running all the way along Camino al Lago, that's actually 10 foot away from the property line on the interior side of the lot. So when you consider the space that's within the rear yard, it's actually quite squeezed down to the minimal. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I was surprised too. It seemed like the buildings were closer to the fence than I thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I can answer anybody's questions. So.
What's the difference in height or the level between the Camino al Lago and the yard? It seems like there's a big step
I
up
think
there.
there's maybe, without having measured it, I would guess it's maybe like a foot drop at least, slowly grading down to where that site wall is. So I think if we are to potentially, put the pool there and whatnot, we're going to need to look at how to properly grade that area and make sure the trees and all that are not impacted.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at, because it seemed to me that would be an issue with a pool in that location. Was just seemed like there'd be a lot going on close to that drop off.
But we're definitely aware of that and want to make sure that we're going to get a landscape architect on board, and we have a project arborist on board already. So we're committed to making sure everything is, tip-top shape for that.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, is anyone else here to comment on this item? Okay, I'll close public comment and bring it back to the commission for discussion and action as appropriate.
Looks good to me.
You haven't seen any drastic difference in the new plan from the existing structure other than just slight repositioning of the pool.
It's slightly smaller, the pool, it says.
Yeah. The only issue I have is the rationale for moving the pool to create more buildable items in the middle. That's not the rationale I would be looking for. But I think that the wrong designation on the property, the orientation of the property is there too. So that's the other factor for me, is it's more than enough in the back if it were properly designated. All right. Well, ready for a motion then?
Make it if you like.
All right, go ahead.
I move that the planning commission approve the special structure permit at 6 Cowell Lane based on the findings and for the reasons enumerated in the staff report, subject to the conditions listed in the special structures permit certificate to allow a swimming pool to be located within the side yard setback.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 I'll go aye too, but it's supposed to, not aye, but to go. It's legitimate use of the lot. All right. Next item C, thank you. Next item C, variance on 99 Orchard Hill Street, request for variance, and I'll turn it over to staff for an update.
Okay, thank you. So, this request before you at 99 Orchard Hill Street is for a variance to allow for a portion of a first floor addition to encroach within the required side yard setback. The addition would be to the main residence. Just an overview of the lot itself. It's an interior flag lot located at the end of a cul-de-sac. It abuts Alameda de las Pulgas. However, that property line that runs parallel to Alameda de las Pulgas is the side property line for this property. That falls in line with current zoning ordinance designations of property lines, unlike the application that you just considered. The scope of the work proposed is approximately 965 square foot total first floor addition. A little over 100 square feet of it is on, if you're standing in front of the house, to the right, and then the remaining 841 square feet is to the left side of the house, facing Alameda de las Pulgas. And of that 841 square feet, the proposed 240 square feet of it, again at the first floor, is requesting a variance to encroach within the required side yard setback. Specifically, the required side yard setback for the property is 48.5 feet based on the width of the lot. And the area of the addition, because of the way that the home is situated, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but at an angle to the lineal property boundary lines of this flag lot, has that new 213 square foot proposal that's encroaching to be anywhere from 6 to 13 feet within that required 48.5 foot side yard setback. Excuse me. So the proposed addition is purposed to reconfigure some existing floor plan space within the home and add on in the form of a new family room and recreation room for the property owners. Some photos that were included in the staff report show the general area of where that proposed first floor addition would be, and specifically little over 200 square feet that's requesting the variance to go into the side yard setback. So specifically, it's within an existing patio that has an existing trellis. There is a swimming pool that you can also see from the site photographs that is located close to the home. There's portions of that swimming pool that are less than 8 feet from the main house, which would not meet today's code. So a legal non-conforming swimming pool less than 8 feet from the house is also one of the existing conditions to consider. The applicant's primary premise of the variance request has to do with the existing main residence, how it was situated on the lot. Like I mentioned before, instead of being built perpendicular to those property lines, you can see from the site plan, it was built for whatever reason at an angle to those property lines. And what that did when that home was constructed was reduce that amount of buildable area based on standard setback applications. There's also other improvements on the site. There's the swimming pool that I just mentioned, not visible, not visible in the photograph, but behind that swimming pool, there's a slight downslope to the lot, not towards Alameda, but towards that rear yard neighbor, an existing sports court. On the site plan, no, it does not. In terms of the staff analysis for this application, there are a specific set of 4 findings that the commission is being asked to make in order to consider granting approval for the variance. The commission must make all 4 required findings in order to support a recommendation of approval. We can go through each one. I'd like to start with the first finding, which is that the project needs to demonstrate that there are special or unique circumstances applicable to the property, including size, shape, topography, location, or surroundings. This is the finding that from the technical staff analysis standpoint, we are not able to make. And specifically because of the spirit and intent of what a variance is intended to purpose, and that is to address unique physical constraints that are inherent to the property itself. So if that property had no improvements on it, or all improvements that are existing were to be removed for whatever reason, those physical unique constraints need to be exhibited on the property, such things as easements, excessive number of clumped heritage trees within a buildable area, extremely sloped topography. Typically we find that 20% or more, very, very steep, whether up or down slope, to minimize the amount of excavation or earthwork and potential environmental concerns associated with that. These are just some examples of very unique lot configuration, the way that a property is configured. There is some slope to the property. Staff does not find that excessive relative to other properties within Atherton that have much steeper topography. The lot configuration of a flag lot off a cul-de-sac, also staff does not find unique to the town, nor to the most immediate general neighborhood. There's one flag lot just mirror an image next to this property, and also one across the street on Alameda, off of Alameda de las Pulgas. The second finding has to do with the ability for the variance to not be granting a special privilege inconsistent with other limitations for other properties in the area. For those same reasons that I just went through, staff is not able to find that the specifics of this request could potentially not be considered the granting of a special privilege to other properties who also may want to do an addition to their house and not meet the standard setback requirements. The third finding has to do with if the project could adversely affect either the immediately adjacent neighbors or the town in general. Staff certainly believes that the project could clearly meet this finding. The scope of the addition is relatively small and standard. It's a first floor addition with all of the extensive trees along Alameda de las Pulgas and the situation of the house relative to the siting of the other adjacent properties. Staff would not believe that there would be any impact to any adjacent properties and or public rights of way. And then lastly is the bigger picture finding is if the granting of the variance could be found to be consistent with the objectives of the town's general plan. Again, staff has the concern of the technical ability for this particular project to meet that finding. Because of the proposed floor plan layout, there still is room to do an addition on the house, albeit not to the extent and design parameters that ideally the property owners are trying to accomplish given their existing floor plan, understandably. So with that, because not all 4 required findings staff is able to make, we are recommending denial of the variance application. I see the property owners are here and their design team as well, so.
We also have a letter came to.
Yes, so I should mention there's a letter of support that was submitted for this application from the property across the way, I guess closest to where the area of addition would face on, let's see, address on Alameda 46, Alameda de las Pulgas. And then there's an additional public comment that was received after the packets were distributed. So a copy was left for each commissioner, and there's copies in the back for members of the public as well. This is from, this one here. This is from the property owner at 48 Orchard Hills, and this is a public comment submitted in opposition to the variance.
Yeah, I have a question for legal counsel too. So there's two levels to this letter. One is the level of being a neighbor, and the other is whatever board member of the architectural planning group for this Orchard Hills. Do you know anything about the impact on that?
I don't know about that. I assume it's only what I see here.
Right.
I would have a problem with that if they represented a town committee because it would purport to carry some weight. I don't know what it is. It does imply that it might be a group of neighbors, but I don't.
Okay, all right. Just want to make sure there's nothing there that you know about. All right. Any other questions? All right. Good.
And I actually do have a question.
Go ahead.
So are we talking, so you give 2 different options here in terms of a motion.
Yes.
One is, your recommendation is basically 3 out of the 4 of these don't meet the criteria. So it's to deny this.
Correct.
Another is ignore those and approve it.
No, you have to actually state that.
Yeah,
I understand,
yeah.
but I'm just saying, if you read it in terms of the different motions,
Right.
I want to understand the technical on this, because this is kind of unusual that we don't see them like this normally.
Right, well, I wanted to give the commission the opportunity to have those tools in front of you should, after your deliberation and receipt of public comment, be able to make the 3 findings that staff is proposing does not meet. If your deliberation and public comment supports you and able to make those findings in the affirmative, that you have those tools in front of you to be able to grant approval.
So what you did is you went out to general plan and said, in order to grant this variance, these 4 out of 4 need to be met.
Yes, for the alternative, correct.
And for us to approve it, we have to say they do meet those.
Right.
Right.
Even though staff report says 2, potentially 3 out of 4 don't.
Correct.
Yeah,
Got it.
it's just staff's job to make sure you see
No,
both sides of it and you make the
I
decision.
understand. I get it. I just want to clarify.
So out of that 965 square foot addition, 240 feet,
214.
214?
14.
Square feet.
Oh, I'm sorry, no, 240.
Yeah,
You're correct. My mistake.
240
240
Okay, so it is
square feet.
240.
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to be clear on that.
All right, any other questions? All right, then I'll go ahead and open the public comment section, and we'll start with the applicant or their rep. So where do you want to go?
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Dana Carmel, the homeowner, and I'm here with my husband Charles, our architect Dave Barnett, and our designer Julie Brown. I think it's important as you consider our request to give you some background on why we applied for this variance. We bought the home 11 years ago, And there were several pre-existing conditions that factored into what we would like to achieve with this addition. Our lot is bordered by the Alameda with significant noise, and that has only increased over the years to the point where the town did put up some flashing lights on the Alameda side for traffic control, as we've seen many accidents happening over by Stockbridge and Alameda, and just a general uptick in traffic. Since buying the home as well, our family has grown, and we are now attempting to take advantage of the existing patio space that's there, which is covered by a trellis, and expand that into a living room, and as part of our remodel. The configuration of the house, as mentioned, is on a severe angle. The existing pool, the trellis, and the patios, along with the significant noise from the Alameda, prevent us from adding on elsewhere. While we understand some of these issues might be fixed by tearing down the house, it is not in our budget, nor in the best interests of the community, given the inconvenience that it would cause the neighbors for a relatively small scope of the proposed addition. As a result, we tried to come up with a plan that stays true to the existing footprint and keeps the addition under the patio trellis area with no impact to surrounding neighbors or any trees. We should mention that we had a plan done, and all of the trees are very far from the addition, and none will be impacted. We spoke about putting drapes around the trellis, and we could actually use that existing space, which would be the equivalent of the space used for a family room. And so we believe that this makes common sense to use areas that are already built out instead of proposing more construction to new areas on the property. And none of these areas can be seen from the road or any neighbors and have minimal impact. To reinforce this, we notified our surrounding neighbors within the 500 feet of the proposed addition and have had no negative response. In fact, the neighbor most directly impacted across from the Alameda has written a letter with their support. The Orchard Hills letter that came in later is not a direct neighbor. They're about 3 or 4 houses down, and I actually didn't even notify them because they are well beyond that 500 feet. So while we know the planning rules can be stringent, we hope that common sense and the best interests of the community will lead to a fair outcome for all. Thank you. And if you have any questions, I can answer them.
Is this organization that he talks about, is that a homeowners association or something like
There's
that?
no homeowners association. I've never met the neighbor in the 11 years we've been there. I think they split their time elsewhere, as from what I understand. So it was all news to us.
Okay, so when you did the outreach to the neighbors,
I reached out, there are 2 neighbors on either side of us, and then to about 3 or 4 homes along the Alameda across from where this addition would be. So it would be the addition, our concrete wall, 100-foot large trees, bushes, more trees on the other side, the Alameda side, and then across the street.
so why then does this one letter come in? I know you can't be a mind reader, but I'm just curious what.
I think he's on the original. I think when Orchard Hills was divided in '85, he is the original landowner or homeowner, or has some personal connection to that Orchard Hills area. But I don't know him.
Yeah, through the chair, I did actually speak to this gentleman. He came into the town before he submitted this and wanted to look at the plans. And he did tell me that he was the original property owner and was involved with the subdivision of that property, and his concern was setting precedent for some of the other properties, most specifically within that Orchard Hill subdivision.
He's never been to our property. He never asked to come see it, so, and we've never met.
And the covenants, conditions, or restrictions, he's probably talking about our town when we approved the zoning.
I took a look and I found no documents recorded that would have any town regulation of implementing such a document. So
All right, good.
if there is such document, it would be private between the property owners.
Yeah, and that is one of the few areas, most recent areas here that has been developed. So this, I assume I'm looking at the right document, maybe this is for your architect, but this document that I'm looking at that kind of has the shape, kind of hatched area, triangular
Can I
area, is
come
that the
closer?
area that you know, is, that you're asking about in terms of the variance?
Yes, so the darker shaded area.
Oh, okay, I know this is gonna sound crazy, but in terms of function, you can make our job a lot easier in terms of moving that back a little bit. Is there a reason
So
that could be moved
we've
back?
spent the last 6 months working on plans, and it comes up to the pool.
I see.
And then there's absolutely no patio space available. So the idea with this addition was to try to create a smaller, taking the existing patio and trellis and making a smaller patio where this family room would block some of the noise and create a courtyard. But the pool is so close to the house that it doesn't allow enough space to do anything.
I have a follow-up on that. So the, when I went out to your site, thank you for the tour, for the compliment.
Sure.
Very nice house, by the way.
Thank
Very
you.
nice- Very nice property. It looked to me that the patio area you talk about is actually not quite as deep as the proposed plan.
I think it's, the proposed plan is just a few feet beyond.
Yeah, well, that's.
And it stays within the confines
Right,
that,
right. So I guess, okay, well, I can talk about it later, but to me, that's asking for more than just the patio area.
well, there's the patio, there are balusters, and then there's a little,
Yeah,
I don't know, ground cover, and then
Yeah.
there's a brick pathway.
Right.
So it ends before that brick pathway.
Right.
So it's a small area, maybe 2 feet beyond the baluster,
Right.
that has some ground cover.
yeah, that's a 10-foot wall or 12-foot wall on that back, the back of.
On Alameda?
No, this longer wall on the proposed extension, how long is that, how long is that?
Oh, the back of the new family room you're talking
Right.
about? 16 feet, I believe.
So that's probably 2 feet, so that's 36 square feet extra. Okay,
Does that sound right?
that's
20.
20 feet.
For the new family room, the lineal length of that wall shows 20, yeah, 20 feet, a little
20
20 feet.
20 feet, 8 inches?
Yes.
Okay, so that's more like 42 square feet, something like that, that would be beyond the current patio.
Well, some comes out a little bit on the side of the patio, and again, it's all ground cover.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just looking at
Yes.
the impact relative to what's there now.
Right.
Above the ground level. Okay, all right, that's, any other questions? Any other comments? From the applicant, or from architects, or?
Actually, I do have that question.
I have an architect
Yeah, I have
question.
an architect.
We're making it to be,
Yeah, wanna,
as long as you're here.
yeah, you might as well.
And I can say a few things too, but go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, most of it would be repeating what she said, but I think the goal of the intent here is they use this patio now.
Right.
There's a sound nuisance coming in. They want to do an addition. I've spent countless hours trying to figure out a design that meets their requirement and still doesn't violate any setbacks, and we keep coming back to this. So that's why we're here today, and I know I've explained to them it's an uphill battle. We're asking a lot, but taking into account how they want to use it, how the site and how the house is situated, and how it works, we thought we would propose it.
So, here's my question, rather than stating something. On this, it looks like my gut feel, knowing the amount of traffic that goes along the Alameda, is that this was a sound barrier. A part of it obviously is for function for what's inside, but another
Yeah.
part is to create a kind of a way to block that sound. And I'm not opposed to that. And I have philosophical feelings that I'll talk about in a little bit in terms of how I would look at this, but I can see by the angle, based on the way that that the house does come in at an angle versus it being kind of plummet below in the lot, that it, based on the setback, that it would kind of create a triangular room there. And I get that.
Our goal was to try to keep the house looking like it was a natural addition that wasn't tacked on and that didn't have walls that jutted in to avoid the setback.
Right.
So a couple of things then, let's continue along those lines. So there are 4 requirements for us to make this exception. How do you address those 4 requirements?
Well,
I mean, I can speak to some of that also. So, the common sense says the options are to take down the entire house and the pool and all the structures, which is, like I said, not in our budget. nor in the best interest of the community. We could have built a second-story addition, which you would probably most likely see from the road. And this was the outcome to minimize it, and the common sense says use that existing space, the patio and the trellis. Again, it's a lot about the structures on the property that we've quote-unquote inherited when we purchased the house. And I think if you think of it from the practical standpoint and the environmental standpoint, it makes the most sense to do what we're proposing.
Okay. So I'll project a question for you then. There's the structure on the patio and the trellis right now. Why was it designed beyond that?
It was a client-driven design.
It was just to keep the house in proportion, utilizing, the room, so we didn't have something that was triangular or really long and narrow and create some function for, a large family.
Primarily, we went a little bit beyond, mostly for sound too. That was one of the drivers.
And that was the other thing, to create that courtyard effect where we could have a table and sit and not listen to traffic.
Okay.
I actually have a question. So distance-wise from the edge of their shaded area to the pool, any idea what that is off the top of your head?
Absolutely.
The corner of
The addition to the pool.
Yeah, so looking right kind of here to there. I mean, you can plus or minus. Well, here's my question. The awkward part about this is, as you know, with variance, that we've got 3 out of the 4 things on here that don't match. We're trying to accommodate what you're asking for, and that's why we're asking all these questions, rather than just kind of say, hey,
Sure.
or at least I can't
No,
speak
no,
for everyone.
absolutely.
And so I'm trying to kind of figure out from a planning standpoint, is there nothing else that you can do that gives you that blockage, that buffer in terms of the
We've
sound?
tried everything. It literally cuts a diagonal across the patio, and we would lose the entire patio, and like I said, come right up against the pool.
It has been something I've spent about 80 hours on.
Yeah.
We've tried.
You either lose the patio or you lose the addition and the sound barrier, or you have a partial sound barrier.
So we're looking at about 25% of the space. Is that the right
roughly,
proportion?
yeah.
That is exceeding the setback line.
Right. And we actually originally, the original plan that we came in with exceeded the front line because we wanted to line it up with the front of the home, and we worked on it, we were able to push it back. And so we left extra room in the front to not exceed that front setback, where there is another home, although he's 125 feet from the front of our house, but we were very conscious to push it, and that pushed it a little bit further back into that side setback because of the angle. So we made a decision to try not to have the front setback impacted as well.
So, and I don't know, Randy, if this is what you were thinking, but if you slide that down closer to what I'm assuming is the kitchen, you'd run into a problem with that corner encroaching in on the pool area, is that?
It just hits the pool, and then there's absolutely no patio. The pool at its closest point is 5 feet off of our kitchen, and we have young kids still. I mean, I never would have designed it that way. You have to really kind of walk around and be conscious of where you're walking in the evening. So the pool is just so close to the house. Now, it was redone prior to us purchasing the home. It's in good condition. I just had a pool company come out. We talked about, is there any easy fix to try to push that pool back? It's not. It's a huge project. It has to be drained. We have to put new water in. We've got acid water, and it's just another, again, environmentally cost. It doesn't make sense, I don't think, to try to start messing with a perfectly good pool. And unfortunately, it's 5 feet away. It's close, so that's also angled. And so then the patio is really small, and we spend a lot of time outside with friends and family in the summer. We feel like we need some patio space, and that's in front of the kitchen. Otherwise, it gets really close to the Alameda, and it's very noisy. So that's the logical spot for a patio.
Well, after seeing the site today, I'm sympathetic to the sound issue that you brought up. And that's the thing that I walked away that kind of stuck with me. And I'm not an architect, so I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but I'm wondering, and as Randy said, we all kind of want to work on this with you, if there's a way to slightly move that and sacrifice on some of the square footage in order to come.
It still impacts that.
Sorry?
It still impacts the setback. I mean, we have tried you know, it's because it's on such a diagonal, you see it runs directly through the middle of the room. Even if we can shrink the room, but it's still going to impact that setback. I mean, I think right now it's a 20 by 16 room, which is pretty standard for a family room, with a sectional television, fireplace, and you know, we wanted to put in big slider doors to the patio to have that indoor-outdoor feel.
Right.
And block the noise. If we pull it back, it doesn't block the noise, and we're still over the setback. I mean, we're happy to accommodate. I don't think we're able to get completely within the setback, though. So it's a question of a few feet.
And you don't want to sacrifice any more of that patio where the table is.
We have no patio then. There's
Yeah.
zero
Yeah.
because the pool's so close, and there's no other logical place to put a patio, and that's really been important to us. We did already make it much smaller we cut it in less than half using that trellis area. But we would much prefer to have a smaller patio with less noise.
Okay, any other questions there?
And so moving the pools out.
Yeah.
Unless you want to give us a donation to do it, but it's $150,000.
GoFundMe project.
Right, and again, like we have to drain the pool, acid wash it, move it. It's a few feet. It's one thing if you're relocating it. It generally makes sense to be behind the house in that area. So unfortunately, and then it starts to slope. Beyond that, we have the sport court, and it's
Also, it would be really fun to get the equipment down that driveway.
right.
All right, okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
We're trying here to accommodate you in some sort of a compromise, and I'm hearing a all or nothing response.
No, that's not what we're saying
You're
at all.
opposing everything that's suggested with a good reason. So is there any sense in trying to come up with anything further, or is it?
Sure. I mean, we are definitely open to ideas. We have played with this for many, many hours, and we've tried to stay within the setbacks. And like I've said, it really doesn't work. It angles like this onto the patio. It looks aesthetically
If there's really any sense in pursuing it
strange. I
further.
mean, we could, you know,
All right.
without
What's-
impacting the
what's
front.
plan B? Well, let's finish the questions, we'll bring it back up for discussion though. So do you have a plan B or no?
Not at this point. I mean, we're open to suggestions and willing to try to lose some square footage, but.
It sounds like you've done multiple iterations.
Yes.
Is there any lesser or earlier iteration of what we're looking at tonight that you could live with? Not your ideal situation, not the best design, but something you could live with and helps to mitigate the encroachment issues?
Most of the other, all of the other design options were within the setbacks. So nothing that I would say I would even need your approval on. The problem was it doesn't meet what they need.
Okay.
I don't think that's
Well,
true.
okay, I'm sorry.
I think we could certainly look at shrinking the square footage. At some point, it probably doesn't become worth adding on a family room that's, 10 by 10 for our family. If there's a certain point where you feel we can go into setback by X feet, then we could certainly try to look at that. I think given the diagonal, it just doesn't make sense to add on a triangular room.
What I was saying was there isn't another option like this that's shorter or smaller.
Yeah, everything else you've done has some impact on the setback.
Yes.
So,
Right. Go ahead.
when you did come up with something that fit within the setback, what was the size?
Everything came back did not impact, it did go outside.
All the other stuff I tried to not impact setbacks, yeah.
Oh, it
This
did.
was the only one where we did not, we violated setbacks.
Okay, so the ones that did not impact the setback, what was the square footage reduction on those, if you recall?
About 400 to 500 square feet.
So you were looking at about half of the size of the
Yeah,
room.
I couldn't do it with just 25%.
And there's no way to mitigate noise then.
All right, any other questions? Just want to make sure we're staying with questions. All right, yes,
Just,
Yeah, go ahead.
being the unfun one in the room. I just want to draw attention to what the code requires, which is that we set forth findings. There's no
Right.
architectural review in town. It doesn't
Right.
get into the specifics of every
Right.
project. So we try to be, for consistency and fairness, very, very black and white.
Right.
These are the findings that need to be made. I don't care how you find the
Right.
findings, but we do need to work through them
Right.
and actually have those on the record.
Right.
And house specific and
Right.
improvement specific. It really is, what is the shape of the lot, and that's how you look at every decision,
Right.
as you know.
Yeah, so that, so let's, if there's any, have you have anything else that you're gonna cover then? All right, good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the extra time too. Is there anyone else here to speak on this item? All right, I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion and action. So, this is this is my third planning commission, and one of the aspects of this planning commission that is so different than the other planning commissions you might see is that there's no design review. There's rules associated with the setback and what you can put where and how we protect trees and things like that. And as much as we sort of got into like how could we help, the bottom line is that the upside to no design review. If you want to paint your house purple, you can, and nobody's going to question that. The downside is that we've got to come up with exactly what is the mitigation issue on this site. Is it different enough? The last one we saw was a big triangle trapezoid kind of shape, and that's a factor. Is it different enough than other lots in the area? If you go down here in the 300 homes along the train track here, I bet you they talk about noise mitigation every night. So the noise mitigation is actually not a code-based criteria. The code-based criteria is it a unique lot? Is it a unique situation in the lot where there's like a drainage swale through the middle of it? Is there an earthquake fault halfway through it that would be dangerous? Is there a gas pipeline? Is there a heritage tree or anything that we're doing that is saying this is unique to this site and it has to be accommodated so that the homeowner has an advantage that they wouldn't have if we didn't make it happen? So based on that is what we kind of are looking at, and that's the other side of not having design review, because clearly on the design review aspect of it, much of your arguments around design review aspect of it. So does anyone see any kind of a way that it's unique?
About the only thing that I can see that's unique about it is that the neighbors on surrounding it aren't impacted, other than across the street, and I doubt they are because they're far enough away. I'm always hesitant to go against staff on what their recommendation is. In this particular case, there are experts or not, and I get the noise thing. I completely do, and you heard my questions. We're trying to figure out a solution, not a hey, I want to, because by the time you get up here with us voting, you never know what's going to happen, and so that's what I was trying to avoid. But other than moving the pool, which I know is expensive, or redesigning that area there where there is room within the setback, I don't know how to. That's what I was asking earlier, what the technicality is on this, because this is one of the few times I've ever seen it where we can approve it based on a certain motion and we can deny it based on recommendation of staff. I just don't. That doesn't seem as black and white to me in terms of an approval based on the fact that there was a recommendation to deny it.
Well, for me, the significant thing is, whether or not staff was even here, if I knew the rule, and the rule is under what criteria is it unique? All right. So that from my standpoint, it's a much more normal flat lot than we very often see. There's the choice of the orientation of the home was the builder at the time, and you could tell they were trying to get the pie-shaped backyard to give it a bigger, deeper feel of the backyard, so they did it for a strategy. And they did it on the home next to it for the same type of thing, so it would orient towards the location of where the driveways come in and give it a deeper look backyard, I think. So that was a design choice, and that design choice was in the footprint of the building area, and it's not a small lot, so it's not like there's a small lot and the person didn't have a lot of choices. There were a lot of choices when that home was built. So because of that, and because of the requirement that we have that we have to meet all 4 criteria, not 1 out of 4 or 2 out of 4. There isn't, I don't believe, any choice but to deny the application based on what we can do on this commission, to be consistent with everybody else who would be looking to it. And in the 5 years I've been on this commission, there have been a lot of people that I've seen at least 6 times where, hey, wouldn't this 2 feet just be okay? And conceivably it would have been, except for the other 50 people that want just 2 feet. And pretty soon, wouldn't 3 feet be okay? And then pretty soon you're going down this road of like, why was the rule there in the first place? The rule was there so that everybody knew what the setbacks would be, so there'd be sort of everybody going in with the idea of, we know where the footprint's going to be, we know how much backyard we're going to have, the distance we're going to have between homes, and that's why they're there. So that's the upside to that. That's part of what makes Appleton Appleton. So with that, if we need to take an action or whatever the commission would want.
Well, I guess the conclusion I came to with this was that it's a crummy situation that the previous owner, the builder, put you in. It really isn't a crummy situation per the boundaries or the features of the lot. And so that kind of helped me figure out that this probably is something that, more than anything else I've seen, as unfortunate as it is to not allow this, the regulations are just so clear that our hands are tied with regard to this. I think the only thing to do would be to knock down the house and start over, and that's just such a horrible, that's, I think feel so constrained by this.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the...
But it's
yeah.
kind of the reality.
It's also clear rules when coming in, so everybody knows the rules.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody ready for a motion? I'll move the planning commission deny the variance at 99 Orchard Hills Street to allow for 240 square foot addition of the construction within the required setback as all 4 of the required findings cannot be met for the reasons enumerated by the staff report.
Second.
Move to second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, none. All right. Yeah, there's a 10-day appeal process. You can appeal it to the town council, and they can review it also. So that's another option for you. All right, thank you. All right, next item D is the heritage tree removal permit 222 Community Alago. And we'll go ahead and start with the staff report.
Thank you. So the request before you tonight is for the removal of 1 heritage oak tree at 222 Camino Al Lago. Little bit of history on the site as it relates to tree removals and proposed tree removals. And before we get into that, the site itself, there's an existing home, swimming pool, and another detached accessory building. The premise of the tree removal before you tonight, it would be associated with the removal of those improvements and the construction of a new single-family home.
There wasn't anything on the site when I was there.
It's
it was
demo.
flat as a pancake.
It's demo.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, there was all kinds of spots where there could have
It's
been
been
something.
improved.
There was no
That
evidence
was
that
approved.
anything had been there for a long time.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm looking at the proposed or the existing topographic survey that was
Yeah.
submitted.
All right. Yeah, it's flat. I've got pictures of it. There's a
So, well,
very lonely tree in the middle of the open lot.
Okay, well, we'll have to clarify your existing topographic survey that shows all the improvements on it, so. The tree proposed to be removed is within the buildable area of the lot based on its setbacks. The lot itself, you can see, is not completely linear in shape, symmetrical in shape. It's got a very somewhat jagged side towards the rear property line. The tree proposed for removal is an oak tree. It's 38 inches in diameter. It's 50 feet tall, and it's located right at the front buildable area. In terms of history of the trees, as I was mentioning before, last year in 2017, the town arborist did approve the removal of 7 trees on the site that were determined to be dead or dangerous. All were oak trees, 2 coast live oak and 5 other oak trees. When we as staff met with the project architect initially for this application, there was an associated request to remove, I believe it was 5 redwood trees at the rear of the buildable area. Based on further discussions with the architect, she has since removed those trees from the scope of proposed removal. So the request before you tonight is just for the removal of the 1 oak tree, again, located just a few feet behind the front setback line of the main buildable area. The project arborist has submitted a report for the tree. It is in his professional opinion that the tree has poor to fair vigor and form. It has codominant leaders, so that's the split of the tree. 2 large, very large limbs, as you can see from the photographs that were submitted. Excuse me. He's also identified some decay within the tree, with an opinion that that decay may increase the chance for the tree to fail in the future. Our town arborist has given a peer review of that project arborist report and has visited the site on numerous occasions, as well as spoken to the project arborist, project architect as well on the tree. It is in her professional opinion that the tree is in relatively healthy health. She has provided some recommendations to increase the preservation attempts of that tree, specifically some cabling up above to connect, so to speak, and she can speak more professionally on what that would entail. That would connect those 2 leaders to create a more stable type environment. She further finds that the decay is not extensive enough to, in her opinion, result in a significant chance of tree failure in the future. You'll see the project architect has submitted an alternative site plan that, should that tree attempt to be preserved, what the resulting buildable area would be. And that is on sheet A3 of the submitted proposed plans. You can see the house no longer takes a simple rectangular form, but cuts in around the back of the tree and then towards the front as well. The project architect, in her opinion, feels because of the shape of the lot, the existence of, you can also see extensive trees around the perimeter of the property, that resulting buildable area based on setback requirements becomes more limited, and hence the request to remove that tree in order to allow for, in her opinion, reasonable development of a single-family home. So based on the professional recommendation of our town arborist that the tree is neither dead nor dangerous nor has significant probability of failure, staff is recommending denial of the tree removal. I see the project architect and project arborist is here as well. So.
Sally, when I went out there, I took some pictures, and there were high up on the right side, the one that's more straight up, there were a bunch of broken branches on the top. Was that way when you were out there?
Not that I am aware of,
Yeah,
no.
there were 4 or 5, there were 3 or...
So that could have happened during the demo process.
Yeah, that's what it looked like to me. There were 3 different branches that were just snapped, right up on the top. I just stood there with the fence and put a zoom on the camera. But there were things that were snapped off. So I'll ask the applicant about that.
Okay.
They were when you were there.
No.
Okay. All right. All right, very big bird. All right, anything else to staff at this point? All right, then I'll go ahead and open up the public hearing and hear from the applicant, or looks like we're gonna hear from the arborist first.
I lost the coin flip, so I need to start this off.
So you lose.
I'm Kevin Kilty, Kilty Arborist Services. I did the survey of the trees on the site. One thing you should know, the lot is 1.7 acres, so it's just barely a little larger than an acre, but it does right now have 40 heritage trees on it, 39. One severely decayed, one was recently taken down. Thus your broken limbs. They were entangled in the other tree, and I believe that's when those limbs broke. So we have 40 heritage trees, not just significant, but heritage trees on the site. The site is really, the lot is really strangely shaped to where it doesn't reduce the buildable space, but there's a lot of the buildable space that unless you made some kind of a real modern triangular building, we're back to triangles like we were on the last one, that area really is not buildable space. It's like a wing that juts out towards the property line. One thing you should know, that the back of the buildable space, there's a 50-inch diameter redwood tree. At the front of the buildable space, there's this 38-inch diameter oak. I'm sure you saw those. The two trees are 100 feet apart. So according to our drip line calculations, that leaves 10 feet for a building. Because you have 38 feet radius, you have 52 feet radius, it's 90 feet. So essentially between the two groups of trees, it's made the lot nearly unbuildable. So getting onto the tree, a drain pipe was inserted into that tree 30 to 40 years ago. I know this because the industry abandoned doing that process in the late 70s, early 80s. Very few companies did it anyway, and they were all quite high-achieving tree companies for the day. So the drain pipe was put in. The reason they quit using the drain pipe is they figured that more damage was done to the tree by inserting that pipe, drilling that 3/4-inch diameter hole into the base of the drain than the actual water that would be draining into it. And also, approximately at that time, the first cable was put into that tree. We can tell the age of the cable by the callus tissue that has grown over the lags that hold the cable in place. And then it looks like 10, 15 years ago, a second cable was. So whoever the arborist on the site was quite concerned about that tree coming apart. Like the report said, there's a poor crotch at 4 feet. Whether that crotch had split and is the reason they put the drain in, or if it was just a cavity that collected water, we don't know now because of later years' growth has closed that up. One thing about decay, it keeps decaying inside, even if the tree is healed over it, you know. We did a drill test on it. We found the decay was approximately 4 to 8 inches below the outer bark, which would be consistent with the growth that's been put on in the past 20 years. It's a case that no matter what was done to the tree, there is a significant chance of the tree failing. And those of you that were on the site saw the lopsided look of the tree. If failure were to occur, it's going to be on the brand new structure. Because of that weird shaped lot, the building can't be moved what would be east of the tree to give it significant clearance because of the setback structure of that. But There are several other trees that are not in great shape on the site, but because of their location, we'll be able to maintain them. And something you should know, there's 80-inch diameter redwood on it, a 60-inch diameter oak tree that are remaining. So the tree cannot be seen from the neighbors. Whoever did put all these oak trees in, or they had to have been planted because they're all around the perimeter, and the redwood trees really did a great job of screening the property. Unfortunately, they made a jungle out of the property. And so what we're looking at is we'd like to remove that tree. The owners are concerned that if they do build a house under it, chances of failure are significant enough that it would cause damage. This will be their house. They are retiring. They're moving from Hillsborough to here, and would like to spend the rest of their days in this lot. Other than that, I can answer any questions. The root crowns were buried, which most trees have root crowns that are buried from houses that were built in the 70s and 80s and 50s, because the leftover dirt they just push over to the trees. And as we know, when root crowns are buried, the oak tree doesn't develop a very good root zone, and it does lead to complete tree failure occasionally. So, you got any questions? I'd be glad to answer them.
Any questions?
I do have a question, and you know I'm a fan.
Yeah.
Kevin's terrific. He's done a ton of work for us in the town, so as a disclosure on that, I want everybody to know that. Second, on this one, why was it, if this was a concern early on when the other 6 or 7 trees were taken out, why wasn't this applied for then? Seems kind of segmented here in a way that would kind of, I know that has nothing to do with you. But.
The 7 trees that were removed were prior to I believe that was a part of a real estate to prepare the property to be sold. I'm not sure, but I think it was before our owners. Yeah. I didn't know they existed until Sally told me.
I would like to say, we
So,
would like
just introduce yourselves here. You're on the,
She's part of our group.
you're on the event, so-
Yes, my name is Anna Chase, and I was the realtor who worked on this transaction. I'm also building in Atherton. I'm a fellow resident. So I wanted to address you and also tell you a little bit about the family and why they want to be part of Atherton community. They are retiring and moving from Hillsborough. They do have a lot of their friends that are fellow Athertonians. We looked extensively. We looked for several months. We couldn't find the right location where they could, they would be in central location. They could walk to their friends. They're not, builders or spec builders. That was the only lot. And if you look at the shape and the reason, we said, okay, the shape is off. However, we can work with that 25% that you lose that extension. She was going to have her beautiful rose garden because, that's what she also had, in Hillsborough. She loves trees. They proposed and they said, well, look, we're going to plant double what you want us because, anything we can do. We did petition to remove that tree because Kevin did identify that tree as, again, being in forest shape. And I guess Kevin did, you looked at the trees twice. The first time before you did the additional testing or excavations,
right.
Because the reason it wasn't removed is because basically it was denied. So we that one tree got segued, and we're here today. I personally did talk to the neighbors. So when you're facing Tutu Camino Lago, the neighbors on the right, it's actually on Somerset. It's the Boyle family. They're personal friends of Meta's, and they want them to their neighbors. They originally recommended, and they said, please be our neighbors. There is a lot for sale. It's been sitting there vacant. Wouldn't it be nice for you to, have a house there, develop a house? They're actually downsizing from where they are in Hillsborough to this lot. So basically the lot is smaller and the house they're building is smaller. They're going to be building very nice French country style home that's going to fit very nicely, as far as with the park lane. So it's very, classic, traditional. Again, with all the screening they're going to put in, it's, again, it's going to look lovely. The neighbor across from them, it's actually that larger 3.5 lot, that's 266 Park Lane, that, you know, where the street curves. So again, that's Mr. Vivek Ranadiva. Again, very long time family friend. You know, he showed them his house. He said, absolutely, you know, but come, I mean, love to have you as a neighbor, love to have you as a fellow, you know, African community. So the neighbors on the left, it's, again, we met them, we didn't know them, but we met with them. We, you know, they live between there and Montana.
We gotta stay on the property a little bit.
I have a question. I know you have a lot of history for this site. That's right.
Yeah.
So we have battling consultants here that have experts that have differences of opinion, which is fine. But I also see, just kind of being devil's advocate here, that A2 and A3 have two different designs, that one that doesn't accommodate the tree and one that does. So clearly from A3 standpoint, if it accommodates the tree, given the kind of sensitivity that you're seeing here based on the other agenda items, what?
Is the tree, what it comes down to, is the tree healthy or not?
I wouldn't keep it.
Yeah.
I mean, if I owned the property, I would build a house under it, definitely.
All right, so you have something about the house or the plan?
Correct.
Okay, good. Let's do
Nadia
that.
Bichko, I'm the designer for the project. So based on conversation with Sally and with the planner, we abandoned the idea of removing the back trees and moving towards pushing the house as close as possible to the front buildable property line in order to preserve the root system for the back trees and give them a little more space and growth, because we have a cluster of 4 redwoods right at the back of the buildable area. We tried to look at the different design layouts. The shape of the house wasn't right or ideal. It also made the house way smaller, what allowed or desired by the owner, unfortunately. So due to the unique lot shape, as you can see, the buildable area of this particular lot is drastically smaller than would be the same size lot but rectangular square, just because of the required setbacks. So we're kind of working with what we have, and we have so many trees left on the site. We left as many as we can. We also planting 6 more 42-inch oaks, which is double the size which is required. It's already on the A2 plan, the location place, so that will add additional screening for the neighbors if there is any concerns.
I'm sympathetic to that. But how long have you been doing the design on the house?
It's been 6 months now.
But so you knew that, you know the trees are, right, the tree is unique, I guess, and it's right in the middle of the lot, right? So this isn't new information.
I mean, yes.
What's the square footage of the A3's home?
That's about 1,000 square feet less than what we're proposing on the
So
main
what's
house.
HU? What's that square footage?
So the allowable is around 10,000 square feet. So we're proposing around 9,500, and you know,
So
the
by
other one is.
preserving the tree, they still have a 9,500
Uh, well, when I put that design, and then I talked to the arborist, to Kevin, and he mentioned that probably leaving that little area between the trees is still gonna damage the root system of the trees, so we should leave actually more. And based on his last suggestion, you know, if we, you know, use 3 times the diameter of the tree size, that leaves us only with 10 feet in between trees, which is impossible to build.
Like I said, I have utmost respect for Kevin, because he's done work for us before. We haven't heard from Sally yet, so I'd love to hear from Sally, because I think that's great.
Yeah, let's wait till we bring it back to us.
Well,
Let's keep
okay.
just keep on asking the applicant questions if there are any questions of the applicant. Any more questions of the applicant? I want to come back to Sally after we come back to us. Any more questions of the applicant? All right, then, anything else that you want to add? Okay.
Well, only that if the tree, I mean, if it, as Kevin said, if they were to fall on the new structure,
Yeah.
and when they fall, then it basically, the damage is going to be on the new structure.
Right, we
So-
understand.
So, I mean, we're in a situation where we have to either preserve the front one or preserve the 4 in the back of the buildable area.
Right,
It's,
that's my understanding.
and 4 makes way more sense. And
All right, all right. Any more questions then? All right, then I'm gonna go ahead and ask if there's anyone else here to speak on this item. Is there anyone else here to speak on this item? Okay, then I'm gonna close the public comment and bring it back to the board for discussion and action. That's appropriate. All right, I'm gonna close the public hearing. Sally, clear?
I'll give you some background and then I'll give you my opinion.
All right.
So the previous owner came to me when he was going to sell the property. There were trees all over growing inside the house, and there was just a lot of weird things going on with the house because he wanted to preserve the trees. So he kept them and then would just change the house design a little bit to make sure the tree would fit there. So there were a few that were maintained, so I approved those that were in the buildable area. That had a lot of decay and then just were pruned really awkwardly to fit into where the house was located. So he sold the property, and then the team came and asked me for trees to be removed informally. So I walked the lot with them. They asked for 4 more oaks to be removed, but I informally denied those, and this is the one tree that they came back to ask for planning commission. I feel that they could design something around the redwoods and the oak tree. We would, with our new process that goes through, they could go to planning commission and we could work with them to make sure the distances are good enough for a new house. The tree does have moderate to fair form because of the 2 leaders, but a lot of trees in Atherton have 2 leaders. So if we're going to deny trees based on codominant leaders and included bark, then there's not going to be a lot of trees left in Atherton. So they can't approve a tree based on that. The whole reason with the new ordinance is to build houses and structures further away from trees so we can avoid when trees fail, which they will fail, they won't hit structures. So there is decay. He did a drill test, which I asked him to do more. I wanted to know exactly how much decay there was. It's not extensive. I mean, this was a hard decision for me. I don't just make decisions lightly. The tree doesn't look wonderful, but in my opinion, it's just... And I approved other trees that were in worse shape on the lot, and it was my opinion that they didn't want to keep a lot of trees, so...
Is this, it does look like this tree split at one point.
So
is that true or not?
It does look like it might have split. I'm not sure. The house was built in '52, the old house that was torn down. So it could have split. It seemed like they were keeping trees no matter what on that lot.
I kind of relate to this tree because it hasn't aged well. It just is an ugly tree, but it doesn't.
But see, I can't base it on if the tree is ugly or not.
I know. Yeah, I know. That's right. I'm hoping that's true.
So I mean, when you do have the codominant and the included bark, there is a chance that the tree can split and fail because of that included bark. It's a weak attachment. I understand that. However, I just can't base my decisions. There has to be more wrong with the tree for me to approve based on that.
Yeah, and now the question I would have too is, and it's more about the safety issue for me. The angle on that.
It's leaning like that because it was trying to get light above the house, right? So it's been leaning like that for a while because it was trying to get light around the house.
So that's a lot of weight out there on that.
It could be pruned to lighten up the weight.
Okay.
I mean, there still is going to be a lean.
I'm less worried about the lean than I am the fact that it's got a lot of leverage to break it down. And if there's any rot or whatever in there, that makes it more susceptible to that, right?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that if there's anything that we can do to make sure that now, and the cabling, that seems like an ugly fix, but I know it's a fix, or it's a remedy. It's not a fix. But the number one thing for me is, well, the number one tree is to preserve every tree we can that we can preserve. The number two thing is every tree we preserve is a safe tree. And the only thing that I would want us to do to make sure of is that, one, that the house isn't close enough to the street, that it does have a failure, it'll land on it.
Right.
And two, that we, at this point, you believe the tree is healthy enough to continue being okay to be around. And you're comfortable with that?
So what is the distance on page A3? What is the distance from the oak tree to the option B?
I think I did 1.5 times.
So that's 1.5 times? I think it's more than that.
Well, that may or may not be,
Yeah.
that's separate from stating that the
So
tree
if you decide to not approve the application, per our new ordinance we're proposing, it would need to be 10 times away. However, if they want to get a variance from that, they could come to Planning Commission and we could work with them to make it a little bit less.
It's an odd-shaped lot, so there's rationale for that. But, all right, I've got everything. I've got
So like
everything.
they said, 10 times would be 31 feet away and 8 times would be 25 feet away. So even if they came to get a variance, it would still need to be around 6 to 8 times, and 8 times is still 25 feet away. So I do understand, and there are large redwoods in the back of the buildable area. I'm less concerned with those, because they're not, they're still able to use the buildable area.
Yeah, but your concern shouldn't be the buildability. Your concern should be whether or not the tree is going to survive or not. So we'll keep you there, and then we'll worry about the rest. All right, so let's bring, any other questions to Sal? Any other questions in general?
So did I hear you right in saying that there is decay, but how would you qualify that decay? I think I kind of got lost there in your
I don't think
qualification.
the decay is extensive. There were more oak trees in the lot that had extensive decay that I approved. I don't feel, the main concern would be the codominant stems failing with the lean. I'm less concerned about the decay. The decay can speed up the failure of the tree.
Where's the cabling on the trees now? You said that there are 2 cables on it. I didn't see them. Where are they? Do you know?
They're about 30 feet up between those two, and the second one's about 10 feet higher.
So they're way up in the tree.
You can't really see them on the photo.
I took pictures of it, and I was looking for anything that would make me feel better about the lean. And that leaning portion is critical to the survival of the tree?
I would not recommend removing that limb. It would be too much to remove.
All right. Any other questions for the staff?
I have a comment, just a question for Stephanie. So I'm always hesitant to go against staff, and the recommendation of staff is that you don't feel like this is consistent with the general plan.
That's correct. Based predominantly on the professional opinion of John Roberts.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that the staff's determination is that the tree is healthy and should be kept. And there are mitigating capabilities, there are remedies to help make it survive better, like cabling and burning.
I don't necessarily say it's healthy, but I don't say it's not dead or dangerous.
I can relate to that too. All right. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
I have utmost respect for our staff and their opinion, but this is an ugly, dangerous tree. And I live next door to a retired couple in a small house who had the most magnificent oak tree. It was on the cover of the almanac as the tree of the year back about 1993. And one day as I looked out the window, that tree decided not to stay there anymore, and it tipped over and crushed the house when the people were at home. And it had been under the care of what is, I would say, arguably one of the most premier arboriculture companies here on the peninsula. No one saw that coming. So I am very afraid of this tree, and we could point out what's written here is that there's 30 or 40 other heritage trees on this lot, and they are going to replace this one tree with 6 new 48-inch box oak trees. which is a good sign. And if they were allowed to move the house forward a little bit, it would no longer have a deleterious effect on the redwoods that are currently situated, what would be behind it, whereas it would affect the roots probably if it were where it was. So I would be very reluctant to approve the survival of this tree.
Yeah. Any other comments? Yeah, this one's tough for me because this tree did not look good to me at all.
Well, it's rated as poor condition.
Well, by their arbors, yeah.
What?
It's not
Same
rated,
range
it's not rated by poor by you.
No.
Yeah. All right, so. Is there any more testing that can be done on this tree to determine anything more, or not?
I mean, he could do radar testing to see to map out exactly how much decay there is.
So my concern is we do the right thing, the wrong thing happens.
Right.
All right. So we say, okay, great, this tree looks healthy enough, and then somebody's walking under it and it doesn't stay up. And then everybody will check off, yeah, they did the right thing, and that person underneath that tree doesn't think so. So it's one of those things where if there is anything else we could do to, I don't have a problem believing that you think the tree is healthy enough, and I am willing to bet on your opinion over my view of this tree. Although if I had that tree leaning that much over my house, I would be calling you to say, can I take that tree out? Is there any more testing that you can be doing on a tree that makes it any more clear?
Well, if they did a radar test, it would cost between $6,000 and $8,000, which is probably a higher value than the actual trees.
Yeah.
I'd rather spend that money on replacement than on more testing. You find out it's bad, and then we still have to cut it down. We probably still have to meet here, which is another cost. So, yeah, we're just driving the cost up to this.
Yeah. All right. Any motion or direction?
Are there two choices in the motion?
Yeah, there's the alternative and then there's the regular. There's the regular, there's the alternative, that's the one, that's the regular.
Shall I go ahead?
If you're ready, make a motion.
I move that the Planning Commission find that the proposed removal of one heritage oak tree, tree number 5, at 222 Camino al Lago in Atherton would not be contrary to the purpose and intent of the general plan for the reasons outlined in the staff report, and that the Commission approve the tree removal subject to the conditions as listed in the draft heritage tree removal certificate.
Motion moved and seconded. Any comments on any comments before we go to a vote?
Can we include some wording to the effect that we're erring on the side of supporting the removal for human safety reasons?
I don't, that's probably.
Is wording like that in the general plan?
The general plan language states trees shall be preserved to the maximum extent feasible while allowing for construction within established parameters of setback and lot coverage. However, Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, if based on the information presented to you tonight, you are able to make a determination that there are significant safety concerns related to the preservation of this tree, then you could make the finding that you're meeting the spirit and intent of the general plan. But I'll let
The only
legal
concern I would
comment.
have is if now people who do not have a background in agriculture are now making determinations about the safety. It really is up to staff to make that determination. Yours is sort of more of a 30,000-foot view, and I would just hesitate to go in that direction of it.
If the wording were, not that we were making a professional opinion, but that we are erring on the side of preserving, preventing injury to humans
maybe the proximity to the buildable area, the potential buildable area.
Yeah, it should be based on.
Because it really is that balance between preserving trees and allowing people to build. And if you feel like those two are in conflict, you want to preserve the tree, but it's really the second prong that you're concerned about, that would be probably more in keeping with the mandate here.
Either that or take the vote on what's there and have it be on the record that way.
I'm just trying to think of a way to incorporate Nancy's point.
Yeah, I think that's on the
I heard
record.
reference sort of
Right.
the second prong
Right.
of, you know, the relationship between the tree and the building, the potential building was in there.
Well, we have
We have a motion,
Second.
we have a motion and a second, right? So you wanna leave your motion the way it is?
Well, I guess so, unless someone can come up with a definite. I don't know, I don't think I'd have to apologize for, the decision. It's regrettable indeed, but I think it's realistic.
All right, any other comments? All right, I'm gonna vote no on this, not, because I believe in Sally's evaluation on it, and because of all the things around the tree these days. But this is, again, this is as close a no to a yes as I can vote, because this, I'm not a professional in this, and I hear conflicting discussion about whether the tree is safe or not, or at least healthy or not. But I'm gonna vote no. I'm gonna vote no on it. But I understand. I certainly understand why a yes vote would be appropriate. All right. All those in favor say aye. Oh, do you have a question? All right. All those in favor say aye. All those in favor of the motion say aye. You have a first and a second. There should be at least two.
Oh.
All right. All those in all those in favor say aye. Opposed? Nay. Nay. Okay. All right, then I'll go back the other way. I'll go ahead and this will be as close to a no as a yes I'm going to give. I move that the Planning Commission find the proposed removal of heritage tree at 222 Camino Alago in Atherton would be contrary to the purpose and intent of the general plan, and for this reason outlined in the staff report, and the commission denied the tree removal. All those in, any moved and seconded? There's a moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
All right. Passes 3-2. All right. Do everything you can to make sure that tree stays up. All right. All right. Thank you. Thank you all. On the appeal process, you have 10 days to appeal to the town council, and they would hear the process again. All right. Thank you. All right. Item 4E is a consideration of the amendments. How appropriate? It's been amendments to Chapter 810, removal of the damaged heritage trees, and to the town's tree preservation guidelines, standard specifications. So, we'll start with a staff report. This is not an action that we take, it's a recommendation that we potentially take as the council to move ahead. We don't actually have the authority to implement this process. It's a recommendation we would make to the town council to modify the code. All right? So let's go to the overview.
So why we are here tonight, requesting Planning Commission consideration to make a recommendation to the City Council on a series of amendments to Chapter 810, preserving heritage trees, as well as the associated supporting document currently entitled our Tree Preservation Guidelines, Standards, and Specifications. So back in March of 2016, staff received direction from the town's tree committee to evaluate that guideline document that I just referenced. That guideline document provides a series of specifications, including tree protection zone and other elements that is implemented through the town's municipal code. following that direction, there was an ad hoc subcommittee created of 2 members of the Planning Commission, 2 members of the Tree Committee, who met over a series of meetings beginning in September of 2016 to February 2017. That ad hoc subcommittee prepared a summary of recommendations that was presented to the Planning Commission. That was presented to the Planning Commission over a series of 3 study sessions from April to December of last year. In December of 2017, the Planning Commission gave staff final direction based on all of the conversations that were received at each of the 3 study sessions, based on comment that was received when staff brought this issue forward to 3 of the town's more informal builders roundtable meetings through the period of February and June of 2017 and February of this year. Those builder roundtable meetings are just a more informal collaboration. Primarily it's developers and contractors and architects who work within the town. So we wanted to make sure that all of the information was being disseminated out through the community. So in terms of the information dissemination of tonight's meeting, we have, beyond just the standard noticing requirements for an ordinance amendment that would go out on the town's website through our e-blast, we have specifically emailed all individuals who have expressed interest in this process over the course of almost 2 years now, and we also placed a notice in the almanac. So, the summary of the direction that staff received from the Planning Commission at your last study session in December of 2017, which considered and for the most part integrated all recommendations that were initially presented to you by the ad hoc subcommittee that I described previously. It includes a series of 10 recommendations, and we can go through each of those recommendations as they move forward in the analysis component. So, jumping into that, I will give a summary of what the recommended change is and the general basis as to why staff was either supporting that change or proposing a revision to that change from what you considered back in December. And then I would like to just defer to the town arborist on any technical questions as they relate to industry standards or the like. So the first proposed amendment has to do with revising and enhancing the town's current definition of what constitutes a heritage tree. Specifically, the changes have to do with adding multi-trunk trees that measure a 15-inch diameter at breast height where the stem tally begins. The second change related to the definition of a heritage tree also be to change where to begin the measurement from. The recommendation is to begin the measurement at 4.5 feet above grade versus 4 feet where it's currently taken. That is most in line with industry standards in other jurisdictions as well. The second amendment also has to do with amending the definition of what constitutes a heritage tree. This recommendation, there was a fair amount of discussion at all 3 of your study sessions, and it had to do with adding redwood trees as an additional specifically identified species of a certain diameter, specifically 15.2 inches or greater, as an additional protected tree beyond oak trees in the buildable area of a lot. The overall basis, direction that staff heard as to why that recommendation was put forth was that it was found to be that redwood trees, as they are a native species to California, and they are found extensively throughout town, that they did, or that they do, create a large, visually prominent aesthetic within the town. And it was felt that it really significantly contributed to the town's fabric. It should be protected at the same level as oak trees are currently protected. The third proposed amendment had to do with revising the town's existing tree protection zone. That's the buffer zone that is based on the size of a tree at a certain distance. Specifically, the town's current, we call it TPZ, is to create this buffer zone or area free of development and to be specifically protected at 12 times the diameter of the tree. The final recommendation that staff heard based off of these study sessions and a lot of analysis and evaluation that went into it was to reduce that TPZ distance from 12 times the tree diameter down to 10 times the tree diameter. Following the study session back in December, our town arborist had numerous conversations with other members of the community, development community. She was able to provide further of her own analysis and evaluation on what the potential impact of a TPZ at 10 times the tree diameter could mean for development. And when we say development, it's not just the construction of a building, but other associated improvements, the hardscape, your swimming pools, your landscaping. Excuse me, that's actually another amendment, and I'll get into that later about what constitutes development and what would be prohibited and or permitted in that TPZ. So based off of that, a change from what was discussed back in December was to add an additional tier of TPZ specifically for the construction of only driveways, fences, and walls. And that is to reduce that TPZ zone down even farther to a distance of 8 times the tree diameter. The next proposed amendment, or fourth amendment, was, and really not an amendment, I should say. It's not an amendment, but just a solidification of an existing regulation, which was to not add or remove any trees from the list of trees that are currently non-classified as heritage trees. There was a lot of discussion, maybe we should include eucalyptus trees, maybe we should add other trees in the list that do not require permit, and the final consensus was, let's keep the list as it currently reads, even though perhaps those trees are less desirable. By requiring a permit for them to be removed, it allows the town to require a replacement tree. So that would allow to that continual, call it green aesthetic that would be lost if that tree was removed. The fifth proposed amendment was for a tree protection plan to now also include a detailed tree inventory with photographs of heritage trees, as well as an appraisal of each tree prior to the site demolition permit. It was found that at times trees have been harmed or damaged on site with permitted construction, and that it was hard to ascertain at that time that the damage happened what the value of that tree was prior to the construction work being done. So that was the basis of that, primary basis of that proposed amendment. Additionally, it was hoped that would also illustrate to a project applicant at the time that they were to pull permit to begin work how financially significant a particular tree may be, and hopefully incentivize compliance with its protection. The sixth recommended amendment was an outcome of discussion on how to best, I'll use the word again, incentivize project applicants to comply with their tree protection plans. And the idea was to require a refundable bond at the time that a building permit was issued. So the intent of surety bonds, such as what that would be to cover the town in the future should damages occur as a result of permitted construction. Typically, what we collect bonds on now have to do with public rights of way, streets, and sidewalks. So if a contractor in the course of doing development on a private property damages a public street, we have that bond to assure that that public improvement is made. By requiring the submittal of a refundable tree bond, that was thought, again, the project applicant may be incentivized to assure compliance with tree protection measures. beyond just the municipal code requirement that specifically states that a violation fee could be paid or would need to be paid by any person who causes any harm or damage to a heritage tree. So we, myself, and the town arborist had further consult with town council after the commission had that discussion and gave us that direction. And based on his professional legal opinion, he found that it would be a more forceful approach to address the desire to strengthen compliance efforts based on what we've heard earlier and what all of these discussions basically ensued from, is by using existing remedies within the Atherton Municipal Code. Specifically, there's a chapter in the Municipal Code of General Penalty which deems all violations of the Municipal Code a nuisance. And I can let Jen probably speak a bit more to the legalities of it, but just to summarize that, by utilizing that existing nuisance ordinance that's already codified in the municipal code and somehow integrating that more clearly and stronger in the tree protection plan and acknowledgement forms that applicants, or I should say contractors, are required to complete at the time of a permit submittal now. It gives the town the ability to penalize a project beyond just having money there. It can require them to have replacement trees, et cetera, versus the bond, which I said would only give them a monetary penalty.
Why would we do both?
Oh, a bond and, because you sort of have to make it one or the other. You're either going after it as a nuisance, you can't double penalize somebody. You can't say, we're gonna take your, you can't say, so you paid, $20,000 bond, well, you forfeited that, and also we're gonna penalize you through the general nuisance procedure. And we've actually started using the nuisance procedure it's pretty brand new, going after people and actually saying that a tree was worth this. We've started doing that. The problem has not been that we didn't have a remedy. We just hadn't been using it. And it came down to a lot of different reasons. Part of it was having the staff to do that, and doing the code enforcement and all these different avenues and recording, how do we know what was there, what wasn't, just the proof element. So we feel like we should probably strengthen and use what's existing, and that would actually give us more leverage, more bandwidth than just saying, well, your bond was set at this, that's it, and our hands are tied. So that's the idea there.
I think about that. It doesn't do the same, it doesn't have the same effect. One effect is on the front end, it's like, don't forget this. And on the other effect is, oh, you forgot that, let's go after you. So the intent was, stop for a minute and think about this, because there's something, what I'm basically looking for the bond to be is an ante. That's the first $10,000 of the $30,000 you owe us for knocking down a tree. So I wanted it to be something on the front end, because what's going on is everybody's just going this motion, and they show up on a lot in DACO and all these other things. I've been out on these properties, and I watch a truck go over the spot where I'm going. There's roots underneath that tree, and it's a big truck, and it's like, okay, so one way or the other, either we get a wider fencing than required ultimately. So okay, there's 40 feet required around the tree, but when you're construction, there's a 60-foot fence around it. So that means your truck goes a long way around. But it just seems like there needs to be something on the front end that just stops every instance. It's like, wait a minute, before you hit the move ahead, it just doesn't seem like there's enough of a speed bump on the front end.
Well, I think absolutely, and I think deterrence is what we're going for, not punishment, when the tree's already gone. So I understand that, and we're absolutely on board. I think maybe there are ways to make it even more clear up front. And I think you have to think about who you're putting the onus on. If you have a bond that the contractor just pays, as they do, go to the permits, pay the bond, and move on, the homeowner doesn't have as much of an incentive. If it's something that you can actually get a lien against their property, and the value of some of these trees is eye-opening.
Right.
So if that is information, I think we're talking about that, having values put on trees in advance. So that's hey, here's your potential liability. And by the way, acknowledge by signing here, homeowner, that this could end up in a lien against your property. I do think you might accomplish upfront that notice that you're looking for. And I
Okay.
think that was our perspective.
All right, let's keep going. I didn't want to stop us so cold, but there is something there. Okay.
So just to conclude that particular amendment, for the reasons that I was discussing and that Jen concluded with, there is nothing in the revised draft ordinance nor tree guidelines that touches upon the bond that has presented to you tonight. The next proposed amendment, which is the 7th amendment, was to enhance the definition of what kind of work is prohibited and or permitted within a TPZ zone. Where the hope was that providing more specificity of the exact types of activities that are both prohibited and permitted would further, of course, further the purpose and intent of the ordinance, as well as to hopefully protect and preserve more heritage trees by providing that more clarity both to the development community as well as staff in its implementation of a tree protection plan that would be required. Having that specificity as text in regulation at the beginning of the design and planning process, we're hoping will contribute to less compliance issues down the line when ground is broken and construction is underway.
Okay.
So the next proposed amendment has to do with requiring requests for any exception to a tree protection zone to be brought forth to the Planning Commission. Right now, the way that the tree guidelines is crafted, the way that the language is crafted, allows every project to have the discussion directly with our town arborist on site-by-site basis, and then within that site on a tree-by-tree basis. So the hope was to streamline that process as well.
For those following home, we're at item 9 of that list.
Yes. So now we're moving on to item 9 in the staff report, it's page 6. The 9th amendment was to incorporate more industry standards in terms of best management practices and other techniques that had to do with tree pruning, topping, and lions tailing. The existing guidelines don't really have that specificity, so we wanted to provide that clarity up front. And then the 10th amendment is just summarized as other textual additions, so that the town's ordinance regarding heritage trees, as well as its supporting resource document of the tree specifications and standards, had internal consistency in their language. We had a fair amount of conversation, I think, with both members of the community that are supportive of more restrictive tree regulations and those who felt that the proposed recommendations, some of them specifically regarding the tree protection zones primarily, would be too restrictive and create an impact on the amount of feasible building that would result for the single-family homes in town, given the presence of heritage trees. Following distribution of the staff report, we've received 2 additional items of public comment left for each commissioner, and there should be copies in the back as well. Both items of public comment are coming from local architectural and development firms that do a fair amount of work here in Atherton. Both state their concern of the proposed tree protection zone recommendation of 10 times, and that it could have a significant impact on the resulting ability to build here within Atherton. An additional concern expressed was adding redwood trees as another specifically protected species within the buildable area for the series of reasons that they have stated within their emails. The most recent item of public comment that came in late this afternoon There's also a rendering that was submitted that I will let Sally address, but just for the members of the public and an overview of the commission, what this rendering is attempting to show is a development site. It sounds like that's currently underway for consideration of new improvements, and the impacts that the varying TPZs that have been discussed and that are being considered would have on this particular property's resulting allowable buildable area. And again, Sally can speak to it specifically, but I mean, generally speaking, it's looking at 3 TPZs out of 6 times, 8 times, and 10 times, and they're finding that a TPZ in this case at either 8 or 10, and really even 6, would really have an impact on the amount of resulting development that could occur.
Right. And an impact on the tree that's there. Okay. All right. All right. Any questions of staff?
It's a lot of info.
Okay, I think we got some people here to talk on that.
Is your goal for us tonight to make a decision on this and make a recommendation to council? Is it, I remember we've gone over this now a number of times.
So ideally, the staff requested goal of the commission tonight is indeed to make a formal recommendation to the council, and that recommendation can be to recommend revisions to the ordinance as well as the tree guideline standards and specification document as proposed by staff within your packet, or to make a recommendation to revise either of those documents based on the conversation that you have and the public comment that you received tonight. So we'd like to get a final draft version of both documents with direction from the commission on any changes, and then ultimately we will need to present that again formally in a public hearing to the city council with a request for adoption before any changes are made.
And they may go through a similar process. Right. They could go for further, but.
And have we had any open house? I'm a senior moment here. Have we had any open houses on this? Have we done kind of what we normally do when we have a review like this, or has it mostly been the 4 people, the 2 from the tree committee and the 2 from
We've had like 4 hearings here.
Well, we had.
Oh, I know we have.
Yeah, well, the study sessions were public hearings.
Yeah.
To allow for that. I know both Sally and I have had conversations with specific individuals, and all of that has been incorporated in the recommendations and or just in a report back as to what the concerns that we have received have been, as well as bringing this issue forward to 3 builders roundtable meetings that I mentioned before.
And are the 2 architects that I see 2 letters here, but in the past, do you know? No architect?
No, I knew one, he was unable to attend because he had a hearing elsewhere.
Okay.
All right, any other questions? All right, then I'll go ahead and open up the item for public comment. So go ahead and open the public comment. Go ahead.
I'm Betsy Colby, and just looking again, the Atherton General Plan land use goal is to preserve the town's character as a scenic, rural, thickly wooded residential area with abundant open space. I hope you'll recommend the updates on this ordinance and the guidelines. I'm so glad we have an arborist who actually wants to save trees and has taken the time to work out the details for updating these. Every week we're losing trees in town. The old ones are getting neglected and cut down to make room for these monstrous houses, which I don't understand. New oaks are slow to grow and will take decades to fill the holes that have been left when the giants are gone. There's also the risk that sudden oak death may come into our town and threaten trees, and in the future that will be even a more serious problem. I think having the tree inventory before the site work begins is very important. Tree trimmers often come into the site before staff has a chance to look at the trees, and then it's too late to really make an evaluation. With the new rules, I hope also that your commission
and town staff will support enforcement so that what we have in writing will actually carry weight and mean something. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, anyone else here to speak on this item? You all just like to party, huh? Okay. Go ahead, come on, you got it.
Good evening. Matt Grippus with Pacific Peninsula Group. I know Jude Curick, our principal architect, wasn't able to make it due to another obligation he had in a different municipality. I think philosophically, a lot of what's being discussed makes a lot of sense, and I think having been in the 3 roundtables myself, Jude has been in those as well. Staff's done a great job. It's been very open-minded. We've had several of these sessions, and there's certainly a lot of logic to all 12 of these requirements, all these changes. I think for me, and I think for our firm, and I know we represent lots of the builders as well, and just having talked with them, is to not, I hate to use the forest for the trees analogy, but focus so much on inches and feet and the economic value of the lot. It's not even about, it's more about losing the ability that we currently have to look at things on a case-by-case basis. And having heard how important you all put the emphasis on Sally's professional opinion, that's beautiful to see. And I think what I would hate to have happen from the private side, if you will, or the citizen side, is to lose the similar ability for us to rely on our own consultants as well. And having the ability to collaborate on a case-by-case basis. And I think what happens when we've gone through 4 of these meetings and 3 of these hearings and 3 roundtables is because we're trying to put things into a box that's a one-size-fits-all. And unless the commission really wants to be the de facto appeals board and get several of these complaints every month, I think to stymie the process we have now of being able to rely on our professionals both within the town and with, Mr. Kilty was here earlier. There are good people out there that know what they're doing, and you at least allow that discussion process to happen. So there's a couple costs. Yes, you can get the economic value of they can't build as much on their property. Yeah, you can mention that. But also there's the cost in terms of the town of having to, either way, I don't think the amount of effort the town has to do at the staff level goes away. If it gets floated up to planning commission, there's still all the prep work required to have the hearings and the appeals. And so I think, again, my biggest concern would be that the loss of this, philosophically, the loss of the ability to have dialogue that we have now, and not put things into a box. And to not penalize the firms that do try very hard and can design a way around putting something within 8 times the tree protection zone. We can somehow make fences work. How are you going to fence things along the property lines if all of a sudden existing sites have trees all over, we can't build fences anymore because they're in a tree protection zone? So there's a practical side of things that gets lost by putting things into a box. So, and again, there seems to be, again, somewhat of a punitive feeling for the couple bad apples and bad events that don't seem to be putting some realization on the firm that try very hard to not have those things happen and plant far more than we take down. And I just wouldn't want to lose the focus on that as well. So again, philosophically, the biggest concern to me would be the loss of the process that we have now. Okay, thanks.
Right. Anyone else?
I would just like to say that I think the process.
You're part of the recording. When you're in front of the microphone, you're part of the recording, and everybody on TV can see you.
Okay.
I always turn around and say, hi, Mom.
I completely disagree with what has just been said. I think the process does not work and has not worked, and I think that this site-by-site negotiation puts a huge amount of pressure on a hugely conscientious town arborist who can't possibly deal with all the requests and all this negotiating that goes on. And so this business about let's keep the dialogue open, let's keep the same process, let's do it site by site, I think that's just an excuse not to have to play by the rules. And I think the Atherton community wants you to play by the rules. We want the builders to play by the rules. You've all done a huge amount of effort and research into what would be reasonable. And I think this suggestion of going from a 12 times to a 10 times, I think that's reasonable. But I think what's really reasonable is to insist that they are strictly and consistently enforced. And if anybody wants to do something different, then come before you guys as the Planning Commission and explain why. And I don't think the current process works.
All right.
Good evening, I'm John McClenahan. I'm a fourth generation arborist with SP McClenahan Company. A whole bunch of things floating through my head, especially listening to one of your items on the agenda earlier. I'll try to avoid it, but it's a very good example for what you're talking about. I just have a couple quick questions. When we measure the stems of the multi-trunk trees, it says a tally, but it also says we're going to measure where they begin. So are we going to measure at the base, or are we going to measure at 54 inches? That's a question. I know we can probably figure that out later. But my main concern is that suddenly I might have an English laurel bush that's been there for 45 years and it's a heritage tree. So, and then you've got a demolition, you've got all kinds of issues. And then in items 3 and item 7, the TPZ is not allow any disturbance in this TPZ, but in item 7, I think it says we have to define what can be allowed in the TPZ. So I think that's where, when everybody's on both sides of the fence, we have a really strong issue to deal with. So any disturbance, you have to realize that any house that gets demolished, you're really at risk of having a lot of happenings in that TPZ. The other weird thing that I ran into the other day was a simple remodel. And they decided to take like a house at 222 Camino Lago. Maybe they just, Sally or I, we would have just moved in. But what if we needed to upgrade the electrical service? Well, all of a sudden I got a 6-inch conduit that I've got to put my 400 amp service in so I can run my Wi-Fi. I don't know what's going on in some of these houses, but 400 amp service sounds like a lot. But I had this in a different town the other day. And all of a sudden, I got a trench where there wasn't supposed to be a trench. And it's that far from a 38-inch oak tree. So I've got an open, air-spaded trench that shows oblique roots and roots this big going under a house. Then I've got the pictures of how we're going to run the conduit through this web of roots. So when somebody talks about exceptions and then somebody talks about enforcement, there are ways to do it, but everybody has to be held accountable to it. And also I just showed up just in case you had any questions from an arborist perspective that's not in-house. And of course I think, Sally's effort is very meaningful and important to trees and should, something needs to be considered. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anyone else here to speak on the item? All right, going once, going twice. Okay, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion and action as appropriate. First of all, I really do appreciate the work that everybody, the tree committee and all the feedback we've gotten from the architectural groups and the arborists and staff and the community. It's been very helpful in trying to make sure we had a balanced approach to this. And so I think we're there. I'm still personally concerned about getting the clarity up front on really emphasizing the tree preservation as a fundamental aspect of the build. I still think too often it's like, oh yeah, don't forget about the trees, rather than, okay, the trees are safe, now build. So I want to make sure the sequence in people's minds is different than it is today. And usually that's associated with cash. So something there that we really zone, make sure. I'm willing to try it this other way without the bond. But our enforcement has to be beefed up a lot, and also I'm worried with the bond. Without the bond, you have a developer who's all of a sudden came into town for one home and they're gone, and they're not around. And so I want something to make sure that we get the compliance.
On that, may I ask a clarified question? We talked a little bit about double penalty and how that is not allowed. Is it, with doing both the bond and then enforcing the code on the back end if something happens, is that double penalty to the homeowner? Isn't the bond paid by the developer?
it can be paid by either. I think quite often it's paid by the developer or the contractor, just for reasons that you have to get insurance behind it, and so it just, for practical reasons, ends up being somebody who does this all the time, quite often. I think what we were thinking from a legal standpoint is if you do have the one and then they leave town, we prefer to have the homeowner. We want that relationship. We want a guarantee from the homeowner. We want the ability to put a lien on their house. And if I have a bond, I lose that. And you might get $10,000, but maybe there are other trees that were damaged, maybe there are other problems. So I think what we were hearing is that there would be valuations placed on trees in advance, photographs, so I actually have something to show this is what we saw on this date, which is something that we haven't always had, and that's hindered our efforts a little bit, and then to start using the regular process against the homeowner.
But, so these two things are exclusive, they can't happen,
Not
both
really.
happen?
No, because what you're talking about is a penalty, you're talking about a tree, basically. So the bond would be a guarantee that they're not gonna damage that tree. If that tree gets damaged, I have already said, I've already liquidated those damages at a set amount.
Okay, so
I
it's
can't
more
then
of the
say,
penalty on the back end.
yeah, you really have to pick what you wanna do.
All right. The other comment I'd say is that I don't think we're adding a restraint here. We're adding clarity and more flexibility. So, you know, if you have a rule that says 12 and you don't enforce it, you don't have a rule. If you have a rule that says 10 and you enforce it, everybody's clear on what you're doing. So we could theoretically just start enforcing 12, and then we looked at that, and the buildable area of many properties in town shrinks dramatically. So then we looked at the industry standards, and the industry standards are 10 and 8 around the driveways and things like that. So we're coming up with data that says in the analysis of how do you preserve a tree, 10 by here. Theoretically, if you didn't have any people around all over the place, your tree would last as long as a tree would last, provided it gets the water. So anytime you have community around it, you're reducing the risk, or you're increasing the risk to a tree. So what we're talking about is that what balance of risk are we willing to provide, and that looks like 10 is a good number with 8 around the driveways where you don't have the depth of construction and all the other things that go deeper in the ground. So I'm comfortable that, what have we spent, almost a year on this?
2 years.
2? Oh, time flies when you're having fun. But it's been a long process of being careful about it, but also with the idea that, and when you see the next report, you'll see that we've been careful about the decisions we made up until this point. But it's also providing clarity. Again, if the rules are like this, and everybody says, oh, those are the rules, okay, now I know the rules. Do they enforce the rules? Yes, they do. If the rules are like this and they don't enforce the rules, people don't know which way to go. So we're trying to make the rules tighter and more clear and also more reasonable. And that's why I'm comfortable with this, the way it's proposed.
Well, I agree with your synopsis, and that just trying to be flexible, still trying to protect the trees, and I would say that in some of the things we looked at while doing this, 6 and 8 times were definitely in the minority, in a drastic minority, as opposed to the 10 that we settled on, and the 8 around the driveways. I think it was that was probably the item that we discussed the longest and the most, and did more comparisons about than anything else in the document. Now, I will say that it's not worth anything if we don't enforce it.
Right.
And that's the key to getting this thing done. Right. And we heard earlier tonight about cases currently around town where there are very evident violations of the TPZ policy that are currently ongoing. So Sally is inundated with different tasks regarding her job as arborist, and you know, who knows how much help she needs, but it needs to be enforced. I think the document is good in my eyes. I am ready to approve it, but I just want to emphasize it doesn't carry any weight if we don't have the enforcement behind it.
Absolutely.
And that's, I think, of the utmost importance. We got to figure that out. I know that's a conversation for a different meeting, a different time, and probably not even up to us, but we got to, as a town, figure that out, because I think people just kind of thumb their noses at it on select cases, and we just see it violated all over town. The other thing I wanted to ask staff regarding approval of any of this is, how do we go about item number 6, proposed amendment number 6, that you do not recommend that amendment?
It's actually not in the final text.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, she just highlighted it first.
I got you.
Why
Okay,
it
thank you.
was there.
Appreciate that.
Any other comments? All right, there is an amendment that's listed there. If somebody wants to propose an amendment or create their own starting version.
Yes.
All right, I can go ahead.
Laura, can we do that since we were on the committee?
Yeah, you could, but I'll do it. I'll make it easier. I move the planning commission to recommend to city council. It's actually town council, isn't it? Isn't it town council?
Yeah.
Okay.
We call them the city council.
Okay,
not the
good.
town.
Very good. Okay. Like she said, the city council approved the amendments to chapter 8.10, removal of and damage to the heritage tree of the town's municipal code, including amendments to the tree preservation guidelines, standards, and specifications, which are found to be consistent with the general plan for the reasons as outlined in the staff report. Moved and seconded. Any comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None? Passes unanimously. Okay, next phase. Thank you all for coming to the party. All right. Item 5 is commissioner's reports. Any reports from commissioners? All right, nothing here, nothing here. We are doing some kind of benchmarking over the last 2 months. Okay, staff report. In this staff report, something I talked about, the idea of, actually, there's this comment about the trees that were approved or not approved in terms of being removed. I think this report is very clear that we've been very thorough in terms of the way that we've done tree protection, and it details out all 18 instances where heritage trees were approved. So Stephanie, you want to go through that with us a little bit?
Sure, I'm happy to. So, just following up on the request by the commission, summarizing all heritage tree removal applications that were brought forward to you or submitted a formal application from October 2016 until December of last year. So, I'll just do the overview summary, and then if you have specific questions on each property, I'm happy, or Sally, to answer those. So, within that time frame, the Planning Commission considered a total of 12 applications, so 12 different properties within Atherton submitted applications for the request to remove 1 and or more heritage trees. Of those 12 applications, there were a total of 21 trees that were requested to be removed. And of that 21, 18 were approved. I'm going to just kind of tailor my way down from the 18 that were approved for removal. So 7 of those trees were trees that were proposed for removal on private properties by PG&E as part of their pipeline gas safety initiative. And PG&E worked with the town on a voluntary basis to submit those applications, and at the end of the day, the town had no legal authority to deny the removal of those 7 trees. There were replanting plans that were approved by the commission, voluntary approach by PG&E in concert with those individual property owners.
And also, we were concerned about the safety issue for the residents, right?
And the safety issue, right, which was the premise of the tree removals. So then, notwithstanding those 7 PG&E, we'll call them specific trees, the remaining 11 trees that were approved for removal were located on a total of 7 different properties. So there was a couple that had more than 1 tree proposed for removal. And of those 11 different trees that were approved, the species of trees, of those 11, 4 were oak trees, And in summary, those four oaks that were approved for removal were approved either due to their existing poor sighting on the lot relative to existing improvements. For example, there was one or more that were only a foot or a few feet from either a home or a patio just paved right up or over the root systems of the trees. The likelihood of potential future property and or personal damage given the tree's documented condition by project arborists, peer reviewed by our town arborist, or the preservation of other perhaps more desirable trees.
Remember the couple that came, that one was very afraid about the tree falling on her because right up to the range. The other one was a cracked, a very large tree on a property with a cracked foundation. So those are the two the two that I can remember.
So there were four oak trees of the total 11 that got approved for removal. And then the remaining 7 were varying species. They were cedar trees, one palm tree, and then one what's called bunya tree.
And that was a tree. That was the one that was hanging. My car almost hit as I drove by it. I mean, it was hanging way over on the street. It was this huge, ugly tree that looked like it was right in the middle of the tree. You had to drive around it.
It's on Redwood. Redwood here.
It was a really, really ugly tree.
And so the last summary point of those 11 trees, again, then 4 being oaks and then 7 being other species, the required replanting plans associated with those approvals resulted in a cumulative addition of 12 new oak trees. So actually, I would say 8 net new oaks within the town.
Yeah, remember the 3 cedar trees in that one property? They were right out front. They were all weak and looking spindly. And none of them were doing well, and that replaced it with a couple of oak trees. So, that's another example of where the label of heritage trees does not really clarify. That banyan tree was basically in the middle of the street.
Right of way. It was
right
of
way.
I think some of it was actually in the right of way.
Right. So I'm glad. First of all, thank you for doing the homework.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, it was really, really thorough and really accurate. And it puts it in a really good framing. As a matter of fact, if the city council of the town doesn't have this, would you make sure that they have this? Because there was and also the city manager, since he had an answer on it that may not have context. Thank you very much.
That's all that I have.
All right.
For this item.
Yes.
One more staff comment item.
Okay, good.
Following up to the question regarding a project on Almondral, was the construction of a new home that had a lot of various permits associated with it that had permit expirations, and there were some other code violations. To date, not to date, but as of 2 days ago, all permits have been filed on the property, including the landscape screening plan, with the exception of 2 open permits for accessory structures. 1, a water fountain, and 2 entry gates. So actually, I talked to the building official about those 2 outstanding permits, and he contacted the project permit applicant to get that ball rolling to come back and have those projects final. They're already constructed. He said there's no additional work that needs to be done. They just need to come in and final those permits. So he also drove by, I think, the other day and said he saw some plantings happening. What he saw didn't require a permit.
Okay, but we need to have a conversation, a different conversation maybe with the building department and have them for our next meeting, if I can suggest that, in terms of what final means. There's got to be 10 of those sites around town that if you drive them, and I'm not trying to play, traffic cop here, but I just happen to live on Almondral, and the ball walks there, with a number of people that see it. There is no way that front yard should be final. There's 0.
Landscaping?
There's no landscaping. Let alone the screening. There is 0 way that should be final. And if that's what we consider as final, if I were a neighbor, I'd be going crazy.
Okay.
There's one over on Ralston that's been going and going and going. I'd be curious on that. But mine was the inquiry. Was Stephanie nice enough to say, hey, I know you keep asking about this, but I'm just worried there are a bunch of them around town. I'm not trying to add more to your daily work or to building or to Sally's for the arborist, but we want to empower you guys so that we make your life easier. And that's what my comment always is in terms of what you guys recommend.
Okay.
And so this is one where whatever we can do to help on that, or Sally or anybody else, let's make it really clear.
Yeah, it just seems like things are stretching out. I don't know what the deal is on that, but the projects are so huge. Some of these projects look like a ship landed in somebody's yard. So but they're just not wrapping up quickly.
Well, and I think we need a definition of what finalist is. For each one of those, and maybe that's a separate thing.
Well, that should be that everything that's on the approved set of plans, all the detail that's on the approved set of plans has been complied with.
Yeah. All right, well, that'll probably is worth looking at then.
We'll let Randy go out and inspect it.
I'm happy to.
I drive by it too, and I go, really? Okay. I go by looking at it. I go by, one of the ones that I use in my pictorial about the effects on the sidewall is now done. One of the ones that I was hoping to come out well, and it came out really well. Another one came out just exactly the way it looked when I took a shot. So, but one of them got treated with wood and really nicely well done and finished. So it actually really has a nice effect. So, but I'm going to go back and take pictures of all those properties again as in their final state too. So, all right. Anything else?
No, we don't normally do this, but I think there was a request open for public comment on the staff report.
Okay.
Is that correct, Stephanie? Yes.
All right.
If it's at the chair's discretion, but if.
All right. Good. As long as you stay for the thing, go ahead.
I wasn't sure if
Sure.
you had public comment.
Good.
Anyway, I want to thank you for compiling that list because I had been alarmed last year when the town manager said that every application for a tree removal was approved, and unfortunately he was right. So you had the 21 trees that were requested. You approved 18. 3 were withdrawn, and I'm not sure what that means, and I'm a little worried if those trees are even around anymore.
They're still there.
They chose not to appeal to us. They chose to follow their guidelines.
So they submitted a formal application to the planning commission to consider the tree removal, and then staff worked with them, and they voluntarily withdrew the application to remove the tree.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's good. I'm not sure what it means when you say that there was poor sight for the improvements. Anyway, I'm worried that a lot of trees are getting taken down for accessory structures, and we're sort of creeping in on these trees.
None of these trees were taken down for accessory structures. None of those 18.
Okay.
7 of them were done because they were within certain feet from gas lines. And so rather than have the town blow up because it was happy to
okay, I'm not PG&E, that's fine. And I'm a little worried too about these new young trees. You're saying, they're getting replaced, but I'm not convinced that people are really taking care of those and that those trees are actually thriving. So I just want to encourage you again to really be careful about preserving our trees. Thank you.
And where is the facts? So if you have any facts along those the young trees that are being preserved, we'd be interested in those facts. All right.
Actually, I have a question. Sure. The math didn't make sense. So in that basic 14-month period, October 16 to December 17, separate PG&E, which I get because that all came through us and they don't really need our approval anyway. So basically 11 heritage trees in 14 months were removed. Did I read that right?
Yeah. Yes. And 4 of the oaks were some of those oaks were found to be unhealthy, and then the 5 cedars out of those 11. Okay. So and then the banyan tree, and I voted against the palm.
One of the oaks was that one on Holbrook that was a foot away, and then another one was only 2 feet away from the main residence.
Right.
I guess I'm shocked to hear that it's that low a number.
Well,
I'm shocked.
I'm not because of all the noise about it. I go like, I know we're not approving willy-nilly and the trees being taken out without really good cause.
That's what I'm saying. Well, and I think part of it too is that Sally's got now the teeth to be able to go and say, right, people listen versus in the past when they didn't.
So,
Would it be of help if we asked the city manager to include this in the newsletter?
I don't know if we need to do that, but I think it's, as long as he's informed and starts accurately describing.
I think the information, he just did a quick extrapolation and looked at the agendas and saw there's X trees at Y property and what the decision was, without really separate comments.
And I'm not meaning as
Yeah.
or rewrite, but more to inform the public, because I would imagine this is more widespread than we know, in terms of the misunderstanding of what the facts are.
Right.
So for that purpose only, for educational
Ask
purposes.
if he wants it to include in one of his
Okay,
reports.
I'll have a discussion with him.
Cool. All right, this, the last item is such a problem on this agenda all the time. Item number 7.
And I'm always so greedy, I always take that, so I'm gonna let somebody else do it.
All right. There's a motion to adjourn this meeting. We're having so much fun. Second. Move second. All those in favor say aye. Aye.